welcome to you all viewers coming to us here at Serena Conference Center, Katonga Hall, and we are discussing the budget. The budget will be read on Thursday. The COVID-19 situation has occasioned that we make Sunday a working day in order to bring you the depth and breadth of the budget in your living room where you are on Sunday, perhaps resting, but you're going to receive us there. And we have people in this room here in Katonga qualified to speak about the things they're going to be telling us this afternoon. And the theme of our discussion is putting the 2021/22 budget in perspective. So expect some serious conversations, perhaps things that will help you understand what that document that will be read on Thursday by the Finance Minister will entail, and things maybe concerning you and the economy at large. We will listen to a panel discussion with the audience discussion also on these issues. But first, in line of the program, we'll have an opening remarks from the General Manager, NTV Uganda, Mr. Johnson Omoro. Then we shall listen to remarks from the Deputy Secretary of Treasury. And then after that, we will delve into our discussion. So welcome all. Pick a pen and paper. There might be things you need to write because the budget concerns you in ways you may not understand. Now I want to invite General Manager NTV, Mr. Johnson Omolo, for the opening remarks.
Invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of NTV Uganda, I welcome you all to this pre-budget dialogue under the theme, putting the 2021-2022 budget in perspective. As a leading broadcaster, we always host an annual pre-budget dialogue together with the Ministry of Finance. And this year, we would like to thank our partners who have joined us to make this possible. Umeme, represented by their Chief Executive, Mr. Celestino Babunji. Civil Society Budget Action Group, represented by the Executive Director, Mr. Julius Munkunda. Minister of Finance, represented by the Deputy Secretary to the Treasury, Mr. Patrick Ochailap. And SEATINI, represented by the Executive Director, Mrs. Jane Nalunga. We are proud to co-host this event, and we are optimistic that the discussions in here today will go a long way in creating awareness and enlightening the people of Uganda about the budget for 2021-2022. Globally, the global economies have been affected by the COVID pandemic, with Uganda being no exception. Therefore, the questions that we'll hear from the expert, especially Minister of Finance, is what strategic budget interventions will sustain the economy from the socio-economic setback caused by the COVID-19? Will this call for strategic alignment with other interventions such as infrastructure, energy, agro-industrialization, among others? And also, will this budget help achieve the desired industrialization for inclusive growth, employment, and wealth creation? We have Operation Wealth Creation here, represented by the able Deputy Chief Coordinator, Lieutenant General Charles Angina. We'll also hear from him on wealth creation. Private sector remains constrained. We as members of the private sector, one of the challenges we face is high cost of capital. And if we are to achieve agro-industrialization, which is a priority in this year's budget and has been a priority in this government's agenda, cost of power remains high. Umeme, as a distributor, will also tell us the role they play in ensuring that we can achieve the desired agro-industrialization. Minister of Finance will also expect to hear from you on how productivity can be enhanced to achieve the middle-income status that is desired in line with Vision 2040 and NDP 3. With those few remarks, ladies and gentlemen, viewers out there watching, It's my pleasure once again to invite you to this exciting engagement this afternoon. Allow me to take the pleasure to invite the Deputy Secretary and Secretary to the Treasury, Mr. Patrick Ochailap, to give his remarks. I thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator, for this exciting interaction. The dress code while in the podium must be masks on, because a new variant certainly hit the economy, and we cannot take chances. So there is a sanitizer here. Thank you. Thank you very much, NTV, for inviting me for this discussion, putting the budget for next financial year in perspective. It's also good at this time that we need to reflect that over the years, we have been taking action to grow the economy, measures to transform the economy, actions to try to lift the very many people in subsistence economy into the money economy, measures to invest in infrastructure as an enabling environment, and of course, measures to ensure that the security of state is not undermined. It's a prerequisite for any economic activity and any economic growth to take place. Next financial year, certainly, as you heard from the State of the Nation address, is coming in with a backdrop of external and internal shocks to the economy. And these shocks are occasioned by an external variable which then entered into our economy in the name of devil COVID-19. It certainly destabilized the production in the farms. It destabilized the profitability of companies, destabilized the production lines in industry, and affected the socio-economic stability, let alone the economy itself was directly hit to the extent that a number of planned activities, planned revenue were affected. For example, the Uganda Revenue Authority collections, which had been projected at about 20 trillion, I think we're now forecasting a shortfall of about 2.5 trillion on account of lack of profitability of enterprises. Number two, there are a number of companies which either shut down or are operating below 30% capacity. And that means the size of GDP shrunk from 6.3% prior to the advent of COVID to a forecast of this year of about 3.3%, which is good news in that Uganda economy is growing, but growing at a lower rate. Number three, we had to forego a number of tax collections which are supposed to be collected. It's now a record from URA that together with arrears and the tax exemption given as incentive package to a number of industries, we forewent about 2 trillion and 10 billion. There were some arrears which are supposed to be collected. We had to write them off. I think that was the subject of a submission by the Minister of Finance to Parliament, and it was granted. And there are a number of tax exemptions under VAT, ETC, to facilitate at least bare minimum survival of industry. To cut a long story short, thankfully, the Bank of Uganda equally helped the fiscal side with accommodative monetary policy. How? The central bank rate has been maintained for the 9th or 10th month running at a low 7%, with the hope that the interest rates equally will come down for lending by the primary dealers in our market or the commercial banks, which have shown some downward trend, but not as much as would have loved. 2, as of last week, because of that accommodative monetary policy to support the fiscal side, despite the huge borrowing from the domestic market, I think you all know the numbers are going to about 6-point-something trillion borrowed from the domestic market. Because of the prudent macroeconomic management, you can see clearly that as of this week, the macroeconomic aggregates remain stable and a source of inspiration and hope that a recovery is slowly but surely taking place and the opportunities for growth of the economy are there. For instance, the short-term tenures, 90 days, I think, came down to almost 6-point-something%, according to the latest auction. The 183-day treasury bills equally came down to below 9%, from a high of 12% at one time. The 365-day treasury bills, I think now about 10%, down from the upswing of about 13% earlier in the year. Exchange rate, thankfully, has equally remained stable. And that's a clear indication of the confidence that the private sector have in this economy, in spite the difficulties the economy faced with respect to external shock occasioned by COVID. The inflation levels are equally stable, making the private sector operate in a very stable and calm environment. We see clearly that with a new dimension of government intention in the front of oil and gas industry, very important agreements were signed between Uganda, Total, and the government of Tanzania for the East African crude oil pipeline. That sent a very clear message to the investors that this economy is set to rebound and grow tremendously. It is also true that the exchange rate as a result of that confidence has now come to an average of 3,550 Uganda shillings to a dollar, down from a high of about 3,800 Uganda shillings to a dollar about 2 to 3 months ago. Of course, it's good for the importers, but it's a very bad thing for the exporters, because for the same amount of dollars, you are now earning less. But I think we shall come to a new equilibrium without going into a Dutch disease when this investment comes into play. So that, in a ballpark, gives you the background of the kind of framework, environment under which the budget for next financial year is being designed. Now, what must we therefore do to sustain the upswing of the economy, even if COVID is there? We know currently we're in a current spike. Hospitals are reported to be full. The capacity for oxygen, for those who need it, is getting overstretched, if not already overstretched. And it is a new threat, even as we plan for what we're planning. But that won't stop us from planning and thinking ahead of what we ought to do, which is why the budget for next financial year, therefore, is aimed at growing the economy through agro-industrialization and equitable growth. Now, what does it mean? How can we grow the economy, industrialize the economy, and create jobs? 4 areas you heard from the State of the Nation address, and I'm very sure my minister will be able to emphasize in detail the actions that need to be taken in form of a strategy. Number 1 is commercialization of agriculture through the agro-industrialization drive. Under this is the new thinking which government has come up with, that the other initiatives to produce, it's a linkage between production, value addition, marketing, and also sustaining the generation of that income at a household level, borne by the statistics of the structure of the economy, where the larger part of the economy is still under subsistence. The decision has been taken that there must be some kind of mass action to pull out these subsistence economies, both in rural and urban areas, because studies have shown that even in urban areas, there are those who are living a subsistence kind of culture or subsistence arrangement, where they are able to barely survive on a daily basis. Which is why, when you saw in the previous lockdown, a large number of people quickly ran into desperate situation, needing things such as food, on which we spent about 60 billion at that point in time. Quite a number of people live from hand to mouth, even in cities. So comparing or together with those in subsistence economy up in rural areas, there is now government intention to go to parish, or in urban centers, ward, a ward. A parish is equal to a ward in an urban center, to bring together a number of issues under the 6 pillars of the parish model. Pillar number 1 is really getting them organized. And that's why the Ministry of Tourism, Ministry of Trade, Agriculture, local government, and certainly, of course, finance, the Bureau of Standards, must quickly, within a transition that government presented to Parliament, that there must be a transition period between now and September for government to take prior actions to organize a parish in a way that's different from other initiatives. And this time round, truly deliver on, or start delivering on transformation of subsistence economy into commercial economy. That's pillar number 1. But linking then that organized team or villagers or subsistence farmers into production units to supply the next level of markets is the one which triggers agro-industrialization. For example, if farmers are organized very well across the country in line with the agricultural zones that are already done, and we train them on extension work, extension work becomes a very good entry point to those organized village production units for them to produce more. Once they produce more for their consumption, the surplus is then taken to the next level under the cooperative or SACCO arrangement. At that level is where they link up with our rural electrification arrangements to process that to the next level. After that next level, we then link them with markets and so on and so forth. At each stage of this is employment addition, is sustained income, is the capacity of the economy to be able to create the jobs that we're talking about in an equitable manner. Equitable between and within villages and rural areas, as well as towns and cities. That's pillar number one for agriculture. Pillar number two, certainly, is for us to continue with our infrastructure investments. I've mentioned one part of the infrastructure, which is electricity. Rural electrification will continue to support the massive output that we expect from our agricultural production, where still we have a comparative advantage. And that then should be able to give us the necessary impetus to create industrial units for right from primary agro-processing to maybe medium to large industrial production units in industrial parks. Electricity will be evacuated from the dams that are being completed into industrial parks. The rural electrification program will continue to supply electricity to rural growth centers so that these organized farmers, together with their SACCOs and their storage facilities working together with the private sector, should be able to supply constantly to the market and also get income constantly throughout the year. On agriculture, still another phenomenon which is coming out very clearly, certainly, is the solar-powered irrigation systems. So that in dry seasons, thankfully for the last 3 years, we have been having enough or adequate rainfall for the farmers to produce, and produce big. In fact, thankfully, when the COVID struck, had it not been for the honorable farmers up country who dug everywhere and everything and produced food, I can assure you this economy would be on its knees. So I salute the farmers, and let's continue. And those of us who are here, I equally do so on a small scale. I'm not a commercial farmer. Let's produce, and produce excess for the markets. So the second pillar is that of infrastructure development, which shall continue, and continue very seriously. The other pillar is the ICT, integration of ICT, to unravel the innovative attitude of the youth. You saw during the lockdown how people started food supply chains by developing applications in Uganda. That just came out spontaneously, and they have continued. Such and many more are the power of ICT in the economy. So those are the pillars that I can quickly recap for the how part of growing the economy from now and taking from where the economy was. The third strategic action is, now that you are produced with the growth in the economy, where are the markets? You heard from the State of the Nation address. Market is both domestic. Let's satisfy a domestic market so that you don't have shortages in certain parts of the country and create artificial inflation there when we can supply those areas. Two is regional markets. The structure of our export market now, although we're still in a trade deficit, our imports are about 9 trillion US dollars. Exports are about 5.5 trillion, billion. So they are $9 billion imports and about 5.5 billion of our value of exports, creating a trade deficit of about 3.5 billion US dollars. So despite that, there is a lot of improvement of our export front as a result of the incentives that have been put in place over the years in investment in those areas. And the second big source of market is certainly the regional markets. After the inside market, there's a regional market. Currently, we export about 35% of our exports go to COMESA. About 12% go to East African Community. 31% are going to Arab world. And what are these? Fruits, vegetables, beef, and I think milk. So you see the direction of production, direction of exports, and the direction then of our concentration of linking industry with external markets. The third area is Europe. Europe and Americas now consume about 11% or 13% of our exports, a share of our exports to international markets. Asia is still very small, 7%, and yet quite a lot of imports actually come from there. And you know the big boy there, from where we import a lot of equipment and manufactured goods, and therefore tilting the terms of trade in our disfavor compared to that region. So the strategic actions which are backed up by production of quality products for both domestic and export markets is very critical as an avenue for us to sustain the production that I described earlier on and be able to truly make our economy reasonably integrated and being able to move forward in a very strong way. And I'm happy the Executive Director of Uganda National Bureau of Standards is here, Dr. Biro. So you will have to tell this panel exactly how we intend to organize this mass production and also mass imports for us to be able to maximize the benefits of the strategic actions for production for both domestic market and external market. Both of us need quality goods to consume quality goods. There is no way of concentrating on quality for export and then we consume a lot of contaminated items here. So I think your job is cut out in this area and you need to expand your capacity to certainly quality assure the entire population in Uganda and the entire world that we are in for a serious business in ensuring that whatever we produce, both for ourselves and exports, meets the minimum quality for human consumption and also animal consumption, both because there's an intersection between animals and people in terms of consumption. So we need to pay attention to that area. It's going to be a special area that we are going to pay attention to if we are to penetrate international markets, because that's the area where we shall have sustained production, manufacturing, and real sustainable incomes from those who are producing, right from a grassroots level or right from the urban centers where urban poor are well organized for production. Finally, I think the big boy is the issue of corruption. His Excellency mentioned it, and you had a statement he made about finance. He must be certainly having his data. What you can do at this point in time is to prepare to cooperate, and cooperate very well in dealing with this, starting with my ministry. In my capacity as a technical head, I undertake to cooperate fully in whatever is coming this direction from that side. I think in summary, that's what I want to summarize for now, without taking much of your time, so that the next issues will come from the discussions and submissions from the panelists. I thought I should summarize that. The details certainly will be in the budget speech. I didn't want to preempt the minister's budget speech. That's why I stayed at high level policy issues and policy direction for next financial year. But probably before I forget or before I conclude, in this kind of fora, it's very important for us to kind of evaluate from where we were, say, for the last 5 years, and what we said we're going to do. A budget should now be seen in the horizon of the cumulative effects of our actions in the past, informing the next steps of what we ought to do in the budget process, so that we don't narrow our analysis into the issues in the budget speech for next financial year. It's a 1 year, short term. And is that linked to the overall strategic direction of NDP? Because I thought the theme is talking about that as well. The National Planning Authority certainly did assess the budget to see whether it was consistent with the NDP set targets over the medium to long term. And indeed, they found that with respect to macroeconomic strategic direction, is well aligned. There are some misalignments in terms of the program approach, which is now a new planning, budgeting, and implementation strategy and monitoring strategy for all government programs. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, because being a new item, we certainly need some little work on the macro side, and we shall be working with all the sectors in certainly distilling these issues and forwarding the necessary policy responses in correcting them to make them smoothly work together for what we are doing. For example, we had set a target of middle income by 2020. But I think as of the current statistics, we're now on $918 per capita, compared to about $700 per capita 5 years ago. So you can see there's growth in the economy. Not only growth, but perhaps growth too with some little equity. But we need to strengthen then the equity component of the growth in that area. And for sure, the targeting of the growth areas of the economy, as I've summarized, linking that with that output with the markets for that will surely narrow the scope of the disparity between the rich and the poor in the economy, even when we see there's a positive growth in GDP per capita. We don't want to use other people for statistics purposes as a number in the denominator to derive the per capita GDP. We want the denominator to truly reflect what the denominator is earning at a household level. With those few remarks, I beg to submit.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary of the Treasury. And you are a panelist, so I kindly request you not to see it, but immediately go up to the podium up here as a panelist, and I kindly invite also the other panelists to come up.
87, the economic recovery program that was done. Some of the things we are still dealing with today are that old, and they are still with us. In 2002, we put out the energy policy for Uganda, and the sector had to be driven. And the minister was very clear that the sector should not be driven by annual ministerial policy statements, which is the budget, but rather by a strategic investment plan. And that's why they developed that policy in 2002. And it has created a lot of opportunities because the required long-term planning could only come from there. They talked about liberalizing the sector, which required a long-term strategy to give a signal, and we'll be talking about long-term signals and guidelines to encourage the private sector to come in and invest and harmonize all those different actors. The energy policy was also required to make institutions support the private sector to come in and invest. Government said I will deal with transmission I want to let the private sector operate in the generation and also in the distribution. And here with us is Umeme, who responded to that policy statement. That's why we are saying that the conversation we are having today, even as we talk of deemed power, as we talk of the tariff, they are really that old. They come from a policy of 2002. What has happened? We have seen many policy messages coming in from government. And today, really, I was looking through my wardrobe. I said, which shirt should I put on? Now that cabinet swearing in is not yet happened, let me spare which shirt and decide which shirt. Not that I'm going to be on cabinet, but of course on cabinet day I will have a shirt. I will have a shirt. So I was looking at the shirt I will put on when the cabinet is going to be sworn. Wherever I will be, I will have a shirt. But what is most important, I will have ironed that shirt using Umeme power. That's really where it ends. It has nothing to do with what you are thinking. But we are available for this conversation, and a lot of things have happened. I really want to get to my panelists and give them a blank check. They had the State of the Nation the other day. They have read the budget. There was a swearing-in speech. There have been a lot of communication. In Uganda, the president's communication sometimes just becomes policy. So you don't just take a president's communication lightly. So I wanted to ask each one of them, and beginning with the farthest, where I have Julius Mukunda from a civil society budget advocacy group, to tell us when you had those the recent statements by the president, including the State of the Nation, which opened the parliament, that is going to be managing us for the next 5 years. What really struck you as something you said, yes, I think I've had this and it's a good thing to go with over the 5 years, and you can flip the coin and say, I also had this, and I haven't really grasped how that is going to go about, how we're going to go about that one. Thank you. Julius.
Thanks, Fred, and good afternoon, viewers. The State of the Nation address, I think, was good. A number of things were said, very, very good, but key for me, two most important elements came out. One was the president's ability to articulate how corruption is now a syndicate. And I think for me it is something that we had discussed, that it is no longer about picking money from a bank and then you run away from it, that actually it's like a value chain. Everybody adds on something until it comes out at the end of the day. Actually, it is now it can be appropriated. So I think appreciating that is very, very, very important. And as such, I think as we look at anti-corruption measures, then we know the kind of medicine, the kind of policies, the kind of measures we can put in place. If it's about inflated projects, then one of the things I've always said is, can't this country have a price list, for example, a market price for everything that we are purchasing and selling? So that really caught my eye, and which was very important. The second one for me is the president's appreciation of the importance of trade, but this time around, safety was added. And I think for me, the appreciation was for the point of it's our responsibility to ensure that we produce safe products. Why do we need to poison other people? Because of our poor handling mechanisms. So it's not about we are funding so well, who boss it is doing. No, it's about a farmer ensuring that when you harvest, you process well. I think for me that was very key. One thing I wanted to hear from the president is when he said we can produce. I wanted to see a sort of prolonged strategy in terms of how can we produce for the markets outside well. Because if Kenya is shutting down, is giving us problems, what do we need to do internally to ensure that we can increase our productions and secure the markets abroad? I really, really wanted to hear that in more detail. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Julius. And on that note, we actually have a lot of trade issues. I've been listening to a conversation on BBC on globalization in reverse. if you get to a small, tiny country called Singapore, which everybody praises, it has one of the best international airports. But by the time the flight takes off from Singapore airport, within the next 1 minute, it is outside of their space. So they really didn't build that airport for themselves. They were relying on international trade. And Jane Nalunga here, apart from really being into tax issues, SEATINI has a lot to do with trade. I'm not biasing you to anything. You have a blank check on the president's speech. Please.
Thank you so much, Fred. And good afternoon, our viewers and listeners. The issue which struck me most, and as Fred has pointed out, SEATINI work on trade, and we are really, really passionate about trade. And we believe that this country, we can trade our way out of poverty if we put our policies right. The issue which struck me most, and which Mr. Chairap here has also pointed out, is the way we are going to sequence our production and trade and marketing. I think we need to learn from past experiences in our trade. We have been running a very huge trade deficit, which is going up every day. It is true, like the president pointed out, we have so many markets, so many, you know, EBA and EU, AGOA, we have the ESC, you know, we have the tripartite, you know, ESC, COMESA, SADC. We have so many markets. But there is an issue that those are just markets. We have failed to enter those markets and sustain our presence in those markets. In fact, when you look at the challenges we have been having, you know, our story when it comes to trader rejections, underutilization of markets, you know, and also self-bans. We undertook a self-ban when it came to the EU market. And when I look at the sequencing, Mr. Chairap has told us we are going to produce, and after producing, then we look for the market. I think we need to rethink that. We need to rethink that. We start from the market, because trade is about a product, a specific product, specific quality, specific quantity, a product and a specific market. Are we sending our product to EU? In EU, are we sending it? Which country? Are we sending it to the supermarket? That's farm to fork, you know? So we need to invest more. I heard the president's speech about the markets which are there, but I think we need to do much, much more. We need to understand the market, and we need to start from the market requirement, go down. In fact, if we do that, we can be able to disregard some markets, and we can be able then to be able to bring our policies, the tax, the budget policies, all the policies together, the Polish model, everything, to be able to align with the market. But if we start from the product, you know, it won't really, we are going to have a problem, and we are going to continue with similar problems. For me, when I was listening to the president's speech, when he was talking about markets, what I wanted to hear is about our regional market, the Rwanda border. You know, that's an elephant in the room. You know, we can't talk about regional trade without resolving that issue. And I'm still waiting anyway for that. Then another issue which struck me most was the issue of standards. I think we need to apportion responsibility, not blame, but who is going to do what when it comes to standards. I think the small-scale farmers have done their part. They have, given all the challenges, using a whole, So when it comes to assisting small-scale producers, when it comes to standards, we need to debate who should do what across the entire value chain, but not putting a finger. I don't know whether I heard right, but it was like the finger is pointing at the small-scale producers. They are the people who are producing things which are not of quality. I think that one we can also, we are here, we can be able to debate that. Maybe I'll stop there for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you very much. She deals with those acronyms, so for how they come in handy. You hear EBA, you hear SADC. Our viewers out there, you have Mr. Google. He always answers those questions. But one thing that excited me was everything but arms. The Europeans told us, you can bring everything except arms. We failed to take anything in some of these cases. And we bought arms, but we didn't take anything in reverse. And this is the deficit, I think, that the DST was talking about. How do we, because there are things we always import. We just can't debate them. But then what can we export? So when I hear the import replacement policy, I'm like, well, you cannot replace everything, but you actually can say, and the president outlined quite a number of markets out there. Some of these markets would benefit umeme. I heard him talk about powdered milk to West African countries, and I know we have one factory here really that is processing powdered milk. I want to believe my friend Celestino here would be happy if those were many, because they would guzzle the electricity. But I don't want to bias you once again in your space. You also have a blank check on what did you hear in the president's remarks on the state of the nation.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Fred. For us, it was very clear. We were part of it, actually, and the job to be done is very, very clear. The president was very clear in terms of job creation, manufacturing, desire to reduce cost of production, financing, transportation, and specifically energy. Doctor, you have talked about the policy which was set up in 2002, giving long-term direction of the sector, where the private sector was invited to participate in distribution and generation. Then the job to be done was very clear. UEB was dysfunctional, was very inefficient. It was not commercially viable. It was a vote within the treasury. So they wanted private capital to come in generation, private capital to come in distribution, to make the whole sector work. And the mechanism then was that the private sector would recover through the pricing mechanism to take back their capital and to operate. And indeed, over the period, a lot was achieved. Private sector invested to increase generation capacity to close 690 megawatts. So you can imagine from the Owen Falls Dam built during the colonial times until Isimba, that was the nearest government came in to build. Then the next will be Karuma. So you can see then the private sector was around 690 megawatts, government 380. Then Isimba comes in 183, and that's where we are now. That's 55 private sector, 30, and 45 government. Now, when you look at the government again commissioning Karuma, the game changes now. You will see that the private sector component in generation will reduce to 37. Okay? The question is, did we achieve all that was meant to be achieved? Reducing losses, yes. Collecting the money, yes. Attracting the money in the sector, over 2 billion was attracted both in distribution and generation. But where we are now, there is a new need for government of saying we want low cost, we want reliable power for distribution, for manufacturing, and we want power to reach every, I think the target is every sub-county, and based on the parish model, hearing from Mr. Patrick Ochilap, we need to go beyond the sub-county to the parish, where there will be load centers to process the agro products. I think that's the new job that is with us. And again, to clarify that, yes, private capital was in. Could it solve all the energy needs of the country? The answer is no. At the moment, we need $5 billion in distribution to achieve NDP 3. Then again, we look and say, that's an average of $500 million to be appropriated every year in the national budget. And when I look at the current budget, I see we need to do a lot to catch up in that space. So instead of looking at the private sector as having come in to help then, they did their job, they helped. But now government will have to come in, both in generation, and they have really come in. You can see the mix has drastically changed. And also investing in distribution and transmission to achieve the last mile connections. And indeed, what we see from our numbers, 2/3 of the power are used by the top 3,300 industries in the country. Actually, for the record, 600 industries consume half of the power in the country. Therefore, if we are to create demand for all these plants that we are putting up, yes, it's the right thing to do. Agro-processing, attracting a lot of manufacturing, which will propel us to the next level. That's the message I got from His Excellency's brief. Thank you.
You got quite a lot of marching orders there of things you must work on. I will go back to my shirt. You can see that's why I chose some umeme colors. I knew they would be advertising behind me, but maybe I can also negotiate a personal tariff down. Unfortunately, it's not done at the MD level. I still have to look for the guy who actually does it. And these days he does it through Yaka. This conversation is policy discussion really, because as we've said, the budget is not an event. This budget, as you can hear, began way back in 2002 for the energy sector, when the policy was put there, and I was really looking through what were the policy directions at the time, as we've said, that the generation capacities should be by independent power producers. Those were the people to deal with the generation capacity. And then the transmission was the space of government. But now we are running quite a danger of really, because the target was you refinance the sector through the tariff. Now we are saying the tariff is too high for the public to consume. Already Patrick Ochailapia has deemed the power, which is already also too high on his side. So how are we going to finance the sector that the MD Umeme is saying we actually need $500 million to further out there? And he has told you the biggest consumers are literally about 600 companies. So is connection the solution, or is it not? Sometimes we use wrong parameters, because you can track number of connected households, and I hear that in a lot of our reports to say now we have connected 1.5 million people. Now power, you can go in any part of Uganda and you'll find power. And everybody is happy. But I want to believe some of the collections are not really coming through as per the payments that you would want, because not every connection translates into an actual revenue to it. So I want Julius to speak to the results framework. Are we tracking the right things? Because I remember when this policy came in, some of the discussions really to make a case for investment, we are comparing us with Spain. Kilowatt hours used by the Spaniards, by the Danish, compared to Uganda, they said, Uganda, you're too far below. And I remember reminding colleagues and saying, those Danish people have to heat even where their cows sleep in winter. In Uganda, we don't. So you are not comparing exactly the right things. Did the wrong indicators mislead us, because we have surplus power, which we have to pay for through deemed power and through a higher tariff? Where did these things, how did they put us here? These are policies made 20 years ago, but as we walk into 2021, 2022, we are in that space. Julius, what is the case of our indicators?
Thanks, Fred. And I think that's one of the key, one of the important elements of planning and budgeting. And I think it is also connected to the program approach that the government has started. I think one of I think for government, the area it was about, if you're in the education sector, it was about how many primary schools you have built. It was about how many teachers you have built. It was about the chalks, scholastic materials, which is very good, because I mean, if you want a functional school, definitely those things must be there. But I think we fell short of why do we need the schools in the first instance, and our children learning. Do we have people getting out of the school with the skills? So that the connection became a problem. And as such, we felt that by having enough teachers, by having the schools, then the children would be learning. And probably it might not be. And I think the same thing with the energy that we are talking about. Is it about the number of dams that we are going to build? And they say, yes, we have reached. Or it's about increasing this number of companies who are consuming power to double them up so that we have more people consuming this particular power. It's about how many households are connected to this particular power and using it definitely for economic, also for economic purposes. So the link there, I think, sort of broke down. I was also looking at, at health. I mean, we are recruiting doctors. We're trying to ensure that we have the drugs in hospital, drugs and equipments and all of these things. These are inputs to solve a particular problem. And I think if we still see that malaria is still killing most Ugandans, for example, if we see that the infection rates are high, if we see that we still have children who are still dying under the age of 5, how many mothers are dying while giving birth, these are some of the things I think we need to be looking out for, and then we go behind to say, yes, this is where the monies are supposed to be invested. And I think for me, that is one thing that we need to solve. If our children are not learning, why are they not learning? Then we go back and ensure that the system is functional. Ensure that money has reached in time, there are no leakages, we buy the right materials of good quality, we know that the parents can send children to school, they don't get them out during the harvesting season. Those are some of the things that we need to ensure that we put most of our monies in. And as such, I think government needs to look at the end game, the result, but not to focus so much attention on these more inputs that we are to talk about. So the connection now comes in with the program-based approach, and whereby now it isn't just not having a school, but if you have children who are in school and are not immunized, then what is the role of the Ministry of Health? So it's very important that different sectors speak to each other to ensure that they are building a total human being with the capacity. So that at the end of the day, Fred, even if you are very healthy, but you are not educated, you are still useless to yourself and to the economy. If you are very highly educated with all the skills, but unhealthy, you can't even do something small because you are very weak, you are still useless to yourself and also to the economy. So it becomes very important that as we look at this program approach, then we know the kind of results we want. A full, well-transformed human being. And as such, monies then goes there. So that we shift from looking at how many chokes we are buying and we stop there and celebrate that, yes, chokes have been bought. We don't celebrate that, oh, now we have enough drugs in hospital, so things are okay. No, we take a step further and see whether actually what we are doing has transformed this particular human being. Maybe I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're engaging in this conversation because quite often when different government agencies are accounting for the budget, back to Patrick, they will tell him a number of kilometers of roads done, number of latrines constructed in schools and health facilities. We have also seen nice pictures of Mulago Hospital in the papers as performance, but we are seeing the results are actually, what are the people doing? How many mothers are walking out with their babies smiling and very happy to do that? So these are kind of realities on the ground, really. And talking about mothers, the only mother I have on the panel is Jen. And I know the men sometimes stand in the corridor while whatever is happening in the labor ward, and then they are the first to announce who have given birth to a baby. But I don't know something about tracking pregnancy. For men, a pregnancy is 9 months. For these mothers, it is week by week between them and their gynecologists. So I want to ask Jane briefly to speak to how should we integrate that tracking, internal tracking. You talked about trade. Don't just look at the farmer producing. You ought to have begun the way from Where is the market? And economics talks about what, who, when. These are basic questions. I'm producing what for who? When they need it? How should I produce it? So you has been in the trade area. You want to speak to that maybe in a few minutes.
Thank you so much, Fred. I agree entirely to what my brother Julius is saying about how should we track results, where, what do we want to see at the end of that day? And I want to go back also to the NDP, the goal of NDP 3. It's really, really clear that we are looking at increasing household incomes and improved quality of life. So it will go beyond all those buildings. And when it comes to trade, I think it's really, really important to ensure that the producers get value for money. Today, in fact, again, when we go back to the president's speech, he's talking about market demand, We have seen what's happening, for example, when it comes to maize production. My brother Chairapi were saying, let us produce and produce. But the moment farmers produce a bumper harvest, it's a problem. The price of maize just shoot not up, goes down, you see? What we have been saying as SEATINI is that there should be a minimum price. And that's why we are talking about increased incomes. Looking at a farmer who can be able to plan that if I plant 3 acres of maize, the minimum I can get is so much, then they can be able to make a rational decision, And that's why we are talking about income at the household level. Today, a farmer doesn't know that if I grow pineapples, this is how much I'm going to get when I harvest. Today, where the consumers were lucky that you buy a pineapples 10 at 10,000 on the road, then you think how much is the farmer getting at the garden? If me in my car, you open the window, by the way, drop there 10 pineapples at 10,000, So when we talk about increasing incomes, again, we need to go back and think about that. And this is where the markets come in, having a market and you produce for the market. The farmers are producing just to eat, and they are not getting any income. For me, which is very, very unfortunate. The farmers are producing, but they are being impoverished every day. You go to a market like Karedwe, the lorries bring the pineapples, dump them there, heaps and heaps, and they start calling people that come and see farmers' tears, saying that these things are very, very cheap, So when we talk about produce, and the remainder we take to the market, this is what we are doing to the people who are producing. They are not protected at all, So we need to see that the producers do produce, but they get a commensurate income for what they have produced. Or else, those people will stop producing. And that's why we have the border economy. A young man, the moment they produce one season of maize, and the price has gone down to 200, 300, they just leave. They sell the land, buy a border, because at least a border somebody will know, will be able to calculate. So we need to rethink. For me, when I look at all this debate, and my brother from Womeme talking about how much he needs to be able to supply electricity, I think we need to rethink the whole privatization. We privatized 20 years ago, like you have said, not 20 years, so many years ago. But we need to look at what was the impetus for us to be able to privatize, under the structure adjustment programs. Does it still make sense, to privatize electricity, when we are talking about agro-industrialization, when the unit of electricity is very high, and you want to compete in the regional market, we want to compete in the CFTA, the Continental Free Trade Area, because today, by the way, we are negotiating, and the president talked about it, we are negotiating the whole market, 53 countries, because Eritrea is not yet there. But can we be able to compete in that market? And maybe, Fred, what I want to also to say when it comes to the Continental Free Trade Area, that the market, we are negotiating it. But I don't see our private sector being part of that negotiations. In fact, if you ask a number of the private sector, what are we negotiating? What market are we looking at? Because trade negotiation is about concessions. I want that market. But also it's defensive and offensive. You need to protect some things in your domestic market. But you're also looking out what you can be able to target. That what, we have milk. That market we can be able to take on. You ask any private sector, what are you planning? What are you planning for the Continental Free Trade Area? You might get varied answers. But at the end of the day, we need to have a value chain approach. And all the value chain actors should be paid, should be adequately compensated. And there should be a carrot and stick everywhere across the value chain. Let quality be paid for. Today, quality isn't paid for, isn't it? Because a maize price is one. How much is maize in the village? It's 500. Whether it's good, whether it's rotten, whether it's what, it's 500. We don't, my brother is there, standard. The standards are there. Grade 1, but they are not paid for, so we don't have grades. So when we talk about incomes, production, trade, there is a lot which we need to talk about. But what I want to say is at the household level, the farmers have done their part.
I think that's a serious observation, because we talked about, it's not just about house connections to Meme. Is this person earning enough money to pay? Because if he can't pay, you are tracking the wrong indicator. You're going to tell Babunga, and he'll gladly tell you have connected 1.5 million households. But really on his radar, he's looking at only 600 factories. Because that's what runs his business. Remember, he attracted private sector here, assuring them Uganda has a market. He has to pay back their return on investment. He's really having a hot seat. These are some of the policy issues that have been in the country for over 30 years. That's why we're not just focusing on a budget as an event. I was able to go back in time and downloaded the Economic Recovery Program document of the World Bank. At that time, we were just looking for $50.9 million, signed on August 19th, 1987. This is as far back as we went. The World Bank convinced its board and said Uganda has already undertaken some good policy initiatives. And I just want to flag a few because they fit into this conversation. One, we had already done the currency reform. Now, we don't need to do that one again. We are still with our gorillas on the notes. They are doing us well. We had already done devaluation 77%. Now, it's a market-driven, but with a lot of interference from the central bank, and as we said, it's not favoring our exporters, as we'll speak of now. It's encouraging importers. Now, the coffee prices had already been revised upwards, which I think is Jane's message. What's the farmer taking home? You don't want to refer to the tears of the farmers. And I think DST referred to them as honorable farmers because they really upheld us. But 30 years ago, we were trying to protect the farmers. The coffee price was very low. So one of the things that had already happened was Robusta coffee prices had already been increased by 182%. Arabica coffee, 158%. Seed cotton had gone up by 375%. Tobacco by 280%. Trying to encourage the farmers to respond to a good price. It was about getting good prices. But what was most interesting as well was by June, 1st of June, 1987, the civil service wage bill had been doubled. I've heard people talking about remuneration of civil servants. But that only came after retrenchment. So we need to first scale them down before we can pay them well. That is the rationalization. So we cannot pay them well the way they are. Retrench first, rationalize, restructure. Are these things we can really do in this budget? What is that conversation of a policy nature? Sir, DST. You're the top technical person in the ministry.
Thank you, Moderator.
Not just today.
These are very interesting arguments now, but let me stick to the line of thinking. Especially, I was provoked by my neighbor to the left that what he's mentioning is a factual situation as is today. But I think I want to take us a little step further. Are we static in that position where maize is going to be grown in a similar manner and evacuated to the market? Do we know market information of the various products of maize? If I stick to maize, yes, we know the number of items we can get from maize. We know the pricing of this, not rocket science. We know it. We know the income that otherwise people who are growing maize can earn if organized, which is why the solution is the parish model. I told you there are about 6 pillars of the parish model, one of which is production. The other is mindset change and organization of the farmers along the lines of cooperatives and circles. In elementary economics, I think in S5, or even commerce, in the lower levels of education, we are taught about the power of cooperatives or organizations in form of circles, if you heard the word cooperatives, is collective bargaining. The farmer Madam Nalunga is talking about is a traditional farmer which we know as the current situation, which should not continue. And under the parish model, the mindset change and organizing the farmers at the household level to produce maize for argument's sake, because maize is almost homogeneous throughout the country, in the quality that's advised by advisory services, which is the other pillar of the parish model under agriculture, to produce the kind of and grade of maize that meets the market, that we know. We know the market prices of maize, globally, regionally. We know the market price of the byproducts of maize, animal cake, feeding the chicken, and how that can integrate with poultry farmers in this economy and beyond. How that can integrate with animal feed producers for fattening their cows for beef. How that can integrate with production of industrial starch for the manufacturing sector. How that can integrate with the need for us to make, besides posho, maybe other products of fortified foods which can live longer for exports to areas which are deficient of the starch, etc., etc. We know that. In fact, under the team that I lead in the Ministry of Finance, it's called Strategic Economic Policy Management Forum. We have done, and I think the paper is in cabinet now, on market studies for the 9 PIMA commodities at the beginning, but we're going to expand them. We have started work on the 5 others to make them 14. That information is available. Now, there is also in the parish model the parish model information system. You both started it, but somehow it had gone down. But it's now coming back in a heightened manner along the line of program-based approach to budgeting, project implementation, and monitoring, which will be able to clearly, with a certain degree of certainty, identify how many, by now, it's now rainy season, people are planted. That market information should be sending a signal now to the center that we're likely to produce these billion metric tons of maize from as low as a parish in Katine, where I have a country home, and building up to the district. So the whole of Soroti, how many tons of maize do we expect this season before the maize ripens? So you don't have to wait for market information to start producing. No, that's working backwards. We know the information system. We know the price of maize. It's now a question of organizing those farmers so that the middlemen do not drive from all the way from Kenya into the gardens and harvest it there. No, it's now collective bargaining power. The people in that area now sit down and say, our price minimum is this. Anybody selling beyond that, you're an enemy to the cooperative. And you should have a cooperative store to store the produce in a manner that you have been advised by the NAD's extension worker in that parish, how best to store that maize. This is the kind of information we're going into. We're not going to be static. The same with the pineapple guy in Karelwe or Wabulenz where they're producing it. It's very important that those people get organized. Currently, they're disorganized. What do you expect? You get what you are saying. But we must organize them along the parish model to link it with a fruit processing plant, maybe in the industrial area around Kapeka now. There's an industrial area there. To answer the question of my brother from Umeme and electricity, the biggest points of evacuation of electricity is, number one, you need to pick it from the dams or production centers, transmit it, that's largely the work of government, and we're doing it, and put it into, first and foremost, the 22 industrial parks, which government is going to do. Industrial parks is the biggest consumer of electricity, followed by the rural growth centers for primary production, followed then by your households, who you must organize. If you don't organize the farmers, which I know the parish model is aiming at, then you are likely to perpetuate the situation which is there. And we're saying no. Beginning next financial year, and between now and September, let's have the prerequisite for a parish model to work. So that by October 1st, we're kicking off. A parish chief is going to be a powerful person. He's the one in charge of the whole economics in the parish. In fact, the whole of government will be in a parish, working in a program approach. Where there are no parish chiefs, because I'm told from local government there are 10,461 parishes in this country, of which about a half are filled now. So part of the strategy, prior action, is to fill those people where the parish chief is not. Once you are formed, this parish development committee or whatever production unit is there is now selected from among themselves. It could have teachers. I can volunteer if I have time to go there, to be part of this in my parish, to be part of the equation of awakening my people or our people to come together. Because I know most of us are disorganized in our villages and parishes. You say, oh, that one, no, that one. No, I think maybe that's the only way to remove those ones as well. So that we come together for a common purpose, which is we must all be a bit better than what we are now. A bit better than the jiggers we have now. By cooperating together, agreeing together on the basis of the information that will be given by experts to produce items which we are able to sell using collective bargaining. You know the principle of commerce that I told you about? And don't sell individually. If you sell individually, you'll die on your own. But if you sell as a group, with your good storage capacity and with your good advisory services, then you're able to sustain a price over the season. Okay. And it goes to the next level. So evacuation of power, industrial parks, priority number one. Number 2, rural growth centers, which are not necessarily per parish, no. You find those centers, there are very many, they are there. Number 3, then the rural electrification strategy. The capital investments and the policy direction with respect to what Madam Nalunga mentioned about electricity is a policy matter that I think is being settled, and the rest of the things are now negotiations between how to deal with issues of implementation of the cabinet decision. Decision has already been taken in that front. So,
all right.
I think that's what I want to seize for the time being.
Okay.
But I'll come back.
Thank you so much. We'll be following up that conversation because, as I've said, some of these things have been mentioned before. They have not come through, so Patrick will come back to us to say, what is the trick this time round? What is going to happen? But also, we're going to have a short break we need to make some money and pay some salaries, but also revive the economy. But as we come towards doing that, there are quite a number of other conversational issues that we want to do. I was looking through the energy sector. I also looked through the transport sector. And I discovered that according to the National Development Plan, we have over 159,000 kilometers of roads, kind of split out into district roads, 24%, which is about 38,000. You have community access roads, the majority, which are 79,000, almost 80,000. You also have urban roads at 19,000, and you are taking care of 20,000 kilometers of roads. Now, this conversation cannot happen without investments in the roads in a way that it's integrated. Because if UNRWA does the trunk road, the conversation has been, you can drive from Arua to Kabale in one day. But there is a farmer in Kabale who doesn't want to leave Kabale. So don't tell him about Arua. His problem is a culvert on a community access road. And that is not funded. So that person does not know about the good tarmac roads. He doesn't know about the expressway. He just can't get his pineapples and tomatoes into that space. Are we speaking on integrated planning, that NDP3? How do we bring all this road sector to speak to the other development areas? Because even if he takes the power there and people can't mobilize the resources for processing, then the agro-processing is not going to happen. Then the cooperative is not going to happen. With that conversation, we are going to have it when we come back. We are also going to have a conversation, should it be government investing in fruit processing? Where is the space for the private sector? Because government said many things, as I've told you, in 2002. Now I hear government going back into the spaces. Is Babunji comfortable competing with government, which taxes him to set up something competing with him? You know, I mean, you don't want to tax me as Jakana, who produces fruits, to go and finance a government fruit factory. Where is the space? Should we merge the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Trade, talking about knowing about the markets? Let's go for a commercial break. We'll be back. Back from the coffee break. The coffee break was not for my audience here. It was for you who is watching us from the comfort of your sitting room or through the comfort of your neighbor's sitting room. You might be watching us through a window. Those things have changed. In the 90s, there were not many televisions because power wasn't also very reliable. So quite often you would have to stand outside and see through a neighbor's window in order to watch the 9 o'clock news. I don't even remember the TVs. It was Uganda Broadcasting Corporation at the time. But if you made coffee and you took it into 3-4 minutes, you must have used the umeme power, which have a lot of challenges of investing and keeping it out there. The MD talked about $500 million almost annually. I want him to really speak to what is sitting in this sector by way of required investments. How does he see that pan out? And as we say, the tariff is no longer the option for financing the energy sector, neither is the government budget. I will get into the audience. You may not yet have seen that I have an audience here. I will get to them also to give us some ideas on how do we finance the energy sector. Can you paint for us the canvas, Mr. Celestino Babunji?
Thank you, Doctor. Yeah, the energy sector is at the center, be it education, be it health, manufacturing, agriculture, improving even homesteads in terms of the quality of life people live. And indeed, under NDP 3, it's very clear. We need to have universal access by 2040, at least by, we should be at 80% by 2030. So, yes, as you indicated, there are those policy reforms in the early 2000s. It's where we are now. NDP 3 is with us. We need to scale up to ensure that we can achieve the government objectives. So energy is at the center of everything. So you find that some of the challenges that inherently the sector has faced is, as I indicated, you find from a generation front, all the way from the 1954 plant that was put up, the private sector has been coming along. Now government came in heavily with the Simba 183, heavily with Karuma. They are coming in heavily now, which was also a challenge. Transmission. I know, Doctor, you come from the Bunyoro region. The power that used to feed you was moving on a 33 kV line from Mutundwe, right? 200 kilometers, serving Kivoga, going through Kakiri, Wakiso. So if there was anything along the way, you in Hoima would always have challenges. But you'll see the impact of the transmission line that was built, linking all the way coming from Kawanda to Masaka, linking Mbarara, going to Nkenda Kasese, to Fort Potro, to Hoima. If you go through that belt, it's now quiet. That's the impact of transmission. Whereas Umeme was taking the brunt previously, you'll see that that was the missing link. You'll again see in Kampala, there's a bit of stability because of the transmission investments. You'll go to Iganga. Tembo still used to have a lot of challenges. When they commissioned transmission substation, everything went quiet. Patrick talked about, I remember Kapeka was a big challenge, you know, but when we put in transmission infrastructure there, everything quietened. So one of the challenges which is being addressed, the first one was generation, that has been addressed. Second one is transmission being addressed. The third area is around distribution, which government has not come in heavily to complement. As I indicated, if you pump in $500 million in a year and you expect to collect it through the tariff, impossible. So the key challenge is how do we balance government investments to drive all these power lines to reach the parish, to reach the load growth centers, to ensure stable supply, while maintaining a fair competitive tariff. And that's why, as you have indicated, government has to rethink of different models, different from what was applicable in 2002 when the reforms were implemented, to ensure that we can achieve this scaling up. And some of the options in the bag, again, are sitting with the government. And indeed, the tariff setting mechanism sits with government. The Electricity Regulatory Authority is a government agency. Again, if you look at the industrial tariff, on the high, it is 7 cents. From midnight, it's 5 US cents. And again, when you look at it, what's the distribution component? What's that component that is related to the service we deliver to these industries? It's less than 5%. Actually, even if you took out Umeme from the industrial tariff, you cannot achieve the 5 cents that is required. Why? You have transmission in there to be serviced, but also you have system losses to deal with. So it's not a Umeme 100% issue to drive the tariff to 5 cents. It's a combined intervention on the structuring of the cost structure from generation, transmission, and distribution. It is the growth of the demand, because the tariff is costs over the volumes that have been consumed. So bringing in more industry is good. Building up new load centers is good. Even when Prime Minister Modi was here last time, he indicated that for Uganda, you need to bring in equipment that can transform our production, you know. Those are the things we need as a country. Even if Umeme is not part of the mix, the challenge remains big for the country, and we need to look at it comprehensively. And as indicated, if you put on the lens of 2002, 2003, when the sector was reformed, all the objectives that were set out were actually achieved. We are in a new world now, which requires low tariffs, requires reliable supply, requires access. We must design new solutions to achieve this. We can't look at the current challenges and reflect on them as if they were there in 2002 and you say the reforms were a failure. No, that would be totally unfair. This country has done a lot in this sector. If you look at South Africa, it's taking on this model. ESCOM now is being broken into 3: generation, transmission, and distribution. If you go to Ethiopia, they are breaking it up. If you go to Rwanda, I think 4 years ago, they got some experts from Uganda here to help them restructure and break it up. There are benefits that you get by splitting up and allowing some of these components to work. but you can't rule out the arm of government bringing in money. You cannot leave it 100% to the private sector to solve.
And next to you is a man who doesn't have that money. And we are saying government must bring in some money. But thank God in the room I have a man who has money, but not for this sector. Patrick Kayota is Deputy Managing Director for NSSF. He has the money, but not necessarily for this sector, though part of his money has found its way there via government. But what I really want him to bring to the floor is the aspect of trust. We have entrusted him with it, 15 trillion now. You see, quite a lot of money we have entrusted with him, and we go to sleep. The other day I was going for my money, but I said, where do I put it? It still seems to be in safe hands. I left it there. So I know some global funds are out there. I hear interest rates are negative in Europe. Why can't Europeans bring their money here and help us to lower the burden of investing in our energy sector? Is it a behavioral issue? Is it where we are located being on the equator? Patrick, what is the problem really? You know, the microphone to him, please. We seem to have an issue being ourselves. And I don't think I used to think it's just Trump who didn't like us. He left. The money is still not coming through. Where are those interest rates that are supposed to be negative in Europe? And I think Patrick Ochaila Pia, his namesake, was telling us they have come down to 9, but they are negative in Europe. Why can't money negatives come to where it is 9? What exactly is the challenge with Uganda, with us? Patrick Kayota.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I don't think the question is we don't have money in the country, but you nailed it, this whole thing called trust. The 15 trillion shillings that NSF has today is actually Ugandans saving. Fortunately, most of that money has actually gone to Mr. Chailap to basically manage the economy. In fact, thank God for that savings. Uganda's domestic savings, about 40% of that is actually NSSF money or Uganda's money going to the government. So at least we trust our government, so we can do that. Trust is one of those things that's such an element at a personal level, family level, national level, is a critical asset. When the president talks about corruption and accountability, if as a country we do not get that together, anything we talk about will be wasting our time. And I think as a country, I think the president really spent time on that. My prayer is that he can actually get to it. This is an example why we still have money in this country. Uganda, we are about 40 million Ugandans today. The 11th parliament is going to be 529 members of parliament. The US is 350 million people, 10 times. They still have 530 members of Congress and Senate. We decided to buy for each member of parliament a vehicle. Why didn't we buy that vehicle, Kira? We have a protocol, we have a prototype. Why didn't we even say, okay, you rent for 2 years while we manufacture the car for you locally, if we are talking about processing? But instead, we are going to buy these cars from Japan, from wherever they're going to come, and that money will flow out. Who says we don't have money? We do. The second point that's really critical to understand, and I think Jane nailed it, this whole thing about marketing. He said about look at the market first. I'm going to give you 2 examples. I have a friend of mine from Nigeria. He was transferred here as an MD. And he fought it for 3 months. He said when they told him he was going to Uganda, he's from Nigeria, he said no. Because to him, NS known with Uganda was nothing good. He's Nigerian. This 4 years ago. He could not assume he could come to Uganda. It was on threat of dismissal that he came to Uganda. He left that position last year. He has refused to go back because he loves the country. So outside our boundaries, who knows us? People will not buy your product until they buy your country. So when we talk about marketing, not only is it about the issue of knowing that market, we have to be very intentional about marketing our country. Now, there's one person who talks about this country a lot, that's the president. The rest of us have not put structures together In Kenya, I'm going to give you an example. Not only does the president of Kenya talk about Kenya, they've set up the Kenya Promotional and Branding Agency in Kenya. It does two things: promotes exports generally, and Kenya in particular, and brands Kenya. So it has done that. The government funds it, gives it enough money, and they do it. But then underneath it, you're going to find an example: Kenya Tea Authority, just organizing the farmers around the tea. And it's funded by the government of Kenya. They've got the Pyrethrum Board of Kenya. Their job is just to organize the farmers around pyrethrum growing, find markets for those farms, and it's funded by the government. So that's where the government comes in. You don't have to privatize a small farmer. No. You don't have to nationalize him. But sure, that small farmer has no knowing the market is where it will go. One interesting thing with AGOA. AGOA was enacted in 2000. I was in the US at that time. AGOA came into passage because of the efforts of Uganda. The president fought for it. At that time, our ambassador in the US, her name was, I forgot, Sempala. Sempala fought for that. As citizens in Uganda, we fought for it in the US. We wanted it, and we fought. The Kenyans were on the side, building parks. As soon as it was enacted, Kenya took advantage. We've exported barely zero under AGOA that we fought for, and Kenya has got all its own. Because there's a point at which we think the private sector will take it. And I think we need to rise up. In a developing economy, there is no way a government can sit on the side and think that the private sector will do it. So we need to craft a way we close it. Thank God we bought the airlines. I'm a big advocate for Uganda Airlines. Many of you are going to say, but it's loss-making. So is Ethiopian, so is Kenya. But what they've done for those countries in terms of branding has been major. So you don't look at Uganda Airlines as a silo. Look at Uganda as the airline as an extension of this country. Because when it parks at Heathrow Airport, and there are millions of passengers going through there, and they see that flag, after a while it begins to register there is a Uganda. So the next time they see made in Uganda, it's not strange. They can buy that product. So we need, as a country, to really look at this thing called marketing. Finally, industrialization. Patrick, I went to, I had studied in NSSF. So I went to Industrial Park because I'm trying to encourage innovators to go there. For some of you who have not been there, the Industrial Park has been set up where you get space, all your security is taken care of, and everything is done very well. The problem is it was set up by the private sector. So the rents are quite high. $4, in Manama it's $4 per square meter per month. And they build them where the smallest 500 square meters. So you need $4 and 500, $2,000 a month in rent. You know, you can't do that. It's very, very expensive. But that's not the bad story. The bad story is many of the industrial parks, many of the buildings in there are occupied by warehouses. People have built, have bought, bringing imports and store it there. Very few are being used for manufacturing. And yet we could put up incentives to help all these Ugandans so that they can move into that sector and begin to help process. I went to Mbale, barely occupied. Tororo Industrial Park is dead. The Chinese were doing the phosphates, which is the largest phosphate plant supposed to be in Africa. I don't know what happened to them. They closed. Well, these are low-hanging fruits. Why not make sure that these work so that we can actually put money in that and do the processing that we have? Finally, my beef, I know Jenangin is here, but he's OWC, NADS. We budget over 250 billion shillings in NADS every year. And they keep on doing the same thing over and over, advise farmers and provide inputs. And they do it efficiently. And as Jane pointed out, they tell the farmers at the beginning of the growing season, when the price of maize is 700 shillings, plant maize. And the farmers listen, and they plant maize. 4 months later, all the farmers have harvested. The price of maize is now 200 shillings. The most amazing thing, 3 months later, the price of maize is back to 700. And you wonder, what was the problem? Where's the disjoint? I would get the 250 billion shillings in NADS, chip it in 3 parts. 80 billion shillings, continue advising the farmers. Then, how many times do you need to grow maize? After a while, you know how to grow the maize. 80 billion shillings, do that. 80 billion shillings, build silos across the country. Even if we eat it, surely with 80 billion shillings, we can build a silo for 5 billion and cleaning machines across this country. The other 80 billion shillings, do what Kenya Pilot 300 does or Kenya Tea Authority does. You give the farmers a forward price. Now, I'll buy that maize from you at 500 shillings, fixed before you even plant. I can tell you something. If we do that, because then we'll have 1 million bags of maize in our storehouse, cleaned, good quality because we control where we stored it. As a state, we can go to Malawi and say, I have 1 million kilograms of maize, I'll sell it to you at $1. And in 4 years' time, we make NAD self-sustaining. And we can do that crop by crop by crop using our own money. We have enough money. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Just still wondering who should build the silos, government or the private sector? Why don't I begin like Jane said, with the Malawi people, do you need maize? So that even before I harvest, I know where it is going. Shouldn't we be thinking of combining the Ministry of Trade with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to make sure we market the country, because it's foreign affairs out there? I know some people have done this. I'm trying to peep into the president's window and see what he's drafting on that desk, because the biggest thing on his desk now is his cabinet. If I can merge them, maybe we'll be moving closer to the numbers you've talked about. 350 million people have 530 MPs and Senate. 400, we have this. So why should we restructure government before we can double the salary? I'm still speaking to those. We are putting the budget into perspective. I'll be getting to General Ngina in a minute because he has been scratched, but I want him to calm down. Generals don't just rush to a bullet that has been fired out there. They take time to say, was that a bird? Was it one of my troops? Was it just an... So I want to get, where is Keith? People are talking about investment, patient capital. And me and you have had a conversation before, where Patrick borrows money from Stanbic and Citi and invests it in UDB and calls it equity. How can debt become equity? We have a problem here, going back to BCom school. This is debt. Now, we have people who have lent him money, he has assets. Is there a possibility of a debt equity swap? You deal with capital markets, which is patient capital, which is encouraging people to list. How should we do our financing, really? We have a budget that has a deficit. Told us we had 6 trillion to borrow domestically. We possibly will have another 3 this year. We have rollovers. How should we tap the private capital he's talking about? Besides trust, the policy issues do matter. Keith is head of that institution, which you call the Capital Markets, and it's an authority.
Thank you very much. Let me stand for clarity. My friend Celestino mentioned $500 million every year. But I think what concerned me most was when he said it can't be recovered through the tariff. And in the private sector, you ask, then why do you invest that money if you can't recover it through the tariff? Are you connecting homes that are sparsely populated, that are dispersed all over the country at a very high cost for no real value? We're seeing solar costs coming down significantly across the world. Why can those people who have chosen to put their homes in the middle of nowhere use solar? That $500 million could easily be $100 million. Now, these are the sort of questions the private sector should be asking when it comes to the issue of who should be financing this budget. Talking about debt to equity swaps, I once had a conversation with somebody quite senior in government about the crude oil pipeline. I think the Minister of Finance did mention it, that he was looking for $130 million. He was going to borrow to contribute to the equity portion of the pipeline. That is okay, because that's a short-term and quick way of raising financing. But there should always be refinancing clauses where you give the private sector the opportunity of investing in this, the equity portion later on. Umeme did it when they issued shares to refinance debt. I think that was the first offer was to refinance debt essentially. So there's nothing wrong with that, because equity is a lot more patient. Yes, it's costly, but for infrastructure, it is certain over the long term. A pipeline, 20, 30, 40 years,
who would be unhappy with an 8% return in dollars consistently? You know, sure, this is going to come, but that's a good equity investment. And equity investors, you're talking about all these people in Europe who are earning negative returns. That is very true. But as I was sharing with my brother here, it is about scale. You know, those guys won't move their money from Europe. They won't move, you know, $50 million, $100 million. The reason why it's parked there is because of scale. So we need to aggregate as much as possible. Even as we're talking about the parish model, let's really focus on aggregating as much as possible, because it costs too much to finance a small-scale operation. And that is why the cost of financing ends up becoming high, even as a country. I think our cost of financing remains high because of the overall scale. So let's aggregate as much as possible. And we see that in the ICT sectors. And that is why I think Mr. Chalap mentioned the issue of cooperatives. That was the whole purpose, you know, collective bargaining, etc. Let us scale up. And when these agencies are scaled up, they've aggregated their operations, their production, etc. They're able to command a better price in the markets. Then now they can those guys out there with money can now pay attention. The NSSFs of this world, that's why NSF cannot invest directly in businesses. They've got to invest through private equity funds, which then invest in the businesses. It's very inefficient for NSSF or UDC or anyone try and invest directly. Well, UDC can shape itself up into a private equity fund. But then there's a certain level of scale. You'll keep hearing that they can't invest below $5 million, or it becomes a bit too costly to invest anything below $5 million. You know, anything below $3 million, you're talking about micro equity. The amount of effort and time it costs to invest in a small venture is the same as what it takes to invest in a $30 million venture. So let's aggregate as much as possible. Thank you very much.
Very interesting conversations here on how else can we finance not just the government budget, but development in this country over a long span, over a long horizon. Shouldn't government just be speaking to policy? Why is government borrowing money to do investments here and investments there? And yet, if you only came up with a policy that aggregate the different investments, then the Europeans would begin to see us. Patrick, it looks like no matter how loud we shout, when people look back, they only see 10 million. I also know you also see these things. When you want to invest, you don't invest $1 million. You don't invest $1 billion. You want to invest $1 trillion. But when you look around, there is only government visible. So how do we really focus the government policy on what? Should it be building silos? Should it be distributing inputs to farmers? Something that Sasakawa is doing and some other entities? What is government doing? Why shouldn't NADS literally be disbanded? What is it doing there? I grew up, I was no NADS and we were planting. Cooperatives were giving us the planting material. Ramadan, the policy space for government seems to have a conflict of interest. The same government that makes the policy wants to come and invest alongside the private sector. So what should be the role of government? And I hear a lot of conversation of government trying to come back into the investment space. Umeme is bad, I will come back. But remember you called Umeme because you didn't have money. Now have you found the money? The airline, I come back, but there were governance issues. Did we sort them out? What should be the policy direction really here if we are to finance development beyond 2021 to 2040? My target is Vision 2040.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. That question was answered about 11 years ago when government took a decision to turn back the clock a bit. Why? Because we were not enjoying the good results that we were seeing in Uganda. And I'm going to speak to that. The Uganda Development Corporation is now the investment arm of government. And its major focus is mainly on investing in those areas, activities or sectors where the private sector is not comfortable enough to invest. Not comfortable because, number one, they have very high sunk costs, which the private sector would not want to shoulder. And two, because of the experimental nature of the investments. You know, private sector doesn't want to experiment because it doesn't have money for experimentation. It wants to make money. It comes in with a calculated return on investment. But in Uganda, we are still an experimental kind of economy. And then 3, the high risks involved in particular areas. Now, when you look around, government has been very careful in coming up with its strategic plan for this investment under UDC. You are talking of a 2020-2030 investment plan, and it is mainly to de-risk areas for private sector to be able to be incentivized to invest there. So the balance here should be government playing a complementary role to that of private sector, not a substitutory role. And in that you find that government gets involved in doing business sometimes directly because of the following. We want to promote growth with jobs. We have been having a lot of investment in areas which can generate growth, but without creating employment for Ugandans. And this has been a very big challenge. The economy is growing, but there are no jobs. You are building a rich economy with the poor people, in other words. So government is saying, let us accelerate those areas where value can be created, but at the same time, you utilize locally produced materials and be able also to put in enough direct, indirect, and some induced jobs. And that's where the demand of UDC is. And also the need to improve the country's trade balance. Private sector can be more interested in importing an item where they pick very quick margins than going dirty to substitute that item by producing it here. And that's where also government wants to go. They need also to strengthen the private sector itself. Because you see, we talk of private sector-led economy in Uganda, but sometimes people have asked, where's the private sector? Who is that private sector you are relying on? Could be majorly foreign, and as a result, you want to give a push to your own local entrepreneurs to be able to also compete. And that means co-investing with them. And UDC is supposed to do that. And finally, the regional balance issue. You know, development in Uganda had been skewed. Every investment here in the center, central Uganda, particularly, actually, the GKMA, Greater Kampala Metropolitan Area, 66% of the economy is here. When will the economy go to West Nile, to go to Atiak, go to Chisoro, and so many other places, including your village in Hoima? UDC has to ensure that it goes and gets dirty by building some of those investments in those areas where the private sector is not comfortable. Therefore, as I conclude, this balance of bringing in government was carefully thought about. Which areas should government go? The first area they chose is agro, where you can add value to materials produced by Ugandans in places where private sectors failed to go. You usually mention, for example, the juice produced in Soroti. What does government have to do with producing juice? Government also perhaps should ask, what was the private sector waiting for to put up a factory in Soroti to add value to those oranges and mangoes and so on, which were rotting there? What was the government doing, private sector doing, to go to Atiak in a place where there were battlefields and turn them into now production fields, which we are seeing there in the Atiaka Sugar Factory. So now private sector is interested. After de-risking, they are lining up. And this is where now government should gradually get out. This is where he should play a role of ensuring that when government has de-risked, don't concentrate in balancing books. Government is not very good in those areas of doing business, balancing books. You hear corruption and so on. Get out, let private sector come in, maybe through a PLC or whatever exit model or mechanism you choose. So those are the areas. Minerals, we have iron and steel, we have limestone, we have oil and gas now. There are areas where private sector will not be comfortable to invest. Like, they have been saying there, like he has told you, some people are not, even if you look for equity, some people will not be interested in bringing their money where the risks are so high. And now finally, there is this area of the knowledge economy, which is emerging in Uganda. We have our scientists, very well trained. They have hard-earned knowledge, but they're not earning from it. They took trouble to learn science. They have now come up with some innovations and others inventions. We are now talking of, for example, vaccine against COVID and some medicines to treat it. But private sector cannot link up with these scientists and say, let us invest in a factory. It would require government to work with these scientists and first de-risk that area. Once they set up factory and they produce vaccine and people see that they are vaccinating and they're earning money, you will see private sector will line up. But for now, they are looking aside. So those are the strategic areas why government should do business.
Quite interesting areas. We are just praying that you don't increase the risk as you try to de-risk. Because then the guys will still sit on the fence. We have been trying to invest in the steel factory for the last 20 years. Somebody came and set up here his roofings, hoping he will one day benefit from that investment. It hasn't worked. So you government, your own decisions, if they take ages, they become a risk. People invested in preparation for the energy, the oil sector, the gas sector. We are still not yet there. And private sector, as you said, we don't have venture capitalists here. They want some returns. So are we risking, are we de-risking? This is a policy conversations that we really want to take back home. They are optional because sometimes you want to ask, why didn't the private sector come in? Are these the reasons, or do they have their other genuine reasons which government can resolve without coming in, but actually find a policy that resolves those fears that they possibly had? It could be the high tariff, could be the cost of capital, could be labor. The labor here is quite diplomatic. It could be standards. That in Uganda, what do you sell to who? And I always tell a story of when a Ugandan bought 3 mangoes downtown, and knowing things in Uganda, goods once sold cannot be returned. So the fellow bought 3 mangoes, went home to eat. Electricity was on. He cut and the mango was rotten. He threw it in the trash can. He's a hungry fellow, really. He cut the second one, it was rotten. He was left with 1 mango. There was only one option: to sleep hungry or to switch off electricity and eat that mango, whatever it was. He took the third option. General Angina, we are dealing with the parish model, and we are really speaking to the grassroots, because that's where it must happen. Whether you are connecting households, they must have income to pay. We've talked about mobilizing them into cooperatives, into groups. The military is in the business of mobilizing people, coordinating them. It's one of the most efficient machineries on the planet. And we know there is that development versus security. We know it was about wealth creation, but because everything in the military is an operation, they called it Operation Wealth Creation. But it's about wealth creation. Jeno, what do you have to say about your current efforts, your previous efforts, and where do you see us going with our budgets if we are to really realize our vision 2040?
Thank you very much, moderator. And I want to appreciate the panelists and also the sponsors of this interaction. NTV, thank you. SEATINI, Sisba, Gumeme, this is the way to go. I want also to particularly raise appreciation to Patrick Ayota. Your submission was spot on. Jane Nalunga, you made very valid points that I may touch in the process of my submission. But it's good for us to start also with raising some questions that can enable us to appreciate why we are moving away from being distributors, because Operation Wealth Creation has been known as distributors of inputs. So that name will not be with us anymore. The blames that you have been giving to us is not going to be there anymore. You have named us so many names, but thank God it's not going to be there anymore. But the first question I would want to raise as I proceed with giving clarity on the good news of where we're heading is that who has been the beneficiary of the so much money that people gain when the maize price goes down? Who is the beneficiary? If we don't identify that beneficiary, he will continue to change the strategy and continue to benefit as we continue with the new strategy. The other point that I thought I should also raise is that if breaking down of different components in the management of Omeme is going to be better than before, why is the cost of the tariff more higher now than when we had only one umbrella in terms of energy, generation, distribution, and transmission? We used to have only one umbrella, but it was cheaper than now. And then it fails to meet the purpose where we have excess energy and yet we are paying more. So does this bring efficiency or it brings disefficiency? Because it defeats us from the military that you have become so robust and yet people are paying more and then the suffering is even more. Gulu is the city without power when the generation is just nearby. Karuma, Ayago, it defeats the purpose. So Operation Wealth Creation comes in and say, is it because of what has been the problem that had engulfed the country in NDP 1, that's National Planning 1, and National Planning 2, where we are doing sector approach? Everybody for himself, God for us all. Is this the tradition and the culture and the spirit that had engulfed the entire country? And people want to break down. Even Omeme says, let us break down into everybody for himself. So can we continue that way when we say we should rationalize the government? Because NDP 3 has a full program for rationalization of the government. Will the government be rationalizing itself while Omeme says we should remain fragmented? So Operation Wealth Creation has been given the opportunity to come out very clearly and say, where do you fit best in order to have learned lessons from the previous distribution of inputs? We realize that in the distribution of the inputs, we have also encouraged syndicated corruption. How does this happen? Because the people who are the ones supplying the inputs at times do not even have the inputs, but they have the access to getting the call of order or to get the contract. Once they have the contract, then they can negotiate with the government at a different price. Then eventually they buy from the wananchi very cheaply, and then they're the ones getting out of they're already out of poverty, but they become richer and richer while the peasants remain poor and poor. So anybody you see today moving forward who will be interested in remaining alone, not interested in parish development model, which parish development model is empowering the locals to be able to buy themselves without this middleman. They will be getting it directly from where we shall have vetted what has come for them to buy. Because there's also one big problem. There's a lot of fake inputs in the market. So if we now are able to know that every region, we shall have regional farm service centers, then it means these parish development committees, parish financial development committees will go and purchase these things from a very centralized stores or service centers, whereby they're buying quality inputs. Then there's a lot of money that will go directly to the farmers, rather than when it is lost in the process of where it is being contracted at NADS, and then it comes to the district. Then the districts also have other people whom they prefer to receive, and then at the end of it, the real beneficiaries get very little, or even arriving late when the season is over. Then they put it under the trees on the veranda. That's money lost, which would have been directly injected in translating the poverty into wealth. We have done quite substantially well in terms of increasing production, because in the past, even that would not have arrived to the farmers. But now it can arrive. But the experience has given us clarity that it is not only agriculture that will remove people from poverty, because we registered the people who cannot qualify on the 4-acre model, which is the presidential model, the 4-acre model, which is presidential. So many people do not qualify. We also have people who do not even have land at all, and that's a reasonable number. So how do they get out of poverty? Operation Creation, I've seen that once you take these resources down, then you are able to make them identify other activities which are even outside agriculture. And I want to salute the president, because he said it's only Myoga money that will not be put under the parish model engagement. And I hope my brother, my good brother Ochailap, Patrick, will not give money to these other fragmented groups. I know here I'm touching the wrong button of the women, because women put a spirited fight that they wanted their money to remain alone, which is contrary to the principle of the parish development model. Because in the parish, you will not operate without women. They are the biggest component and they are critical component. Even when God was creating the earth, it was not complete without women. But now the women want to operate alone. Still the same spirit of NDP 1, NDP 2, which is still with the women. And yet we know without women, the parish development model is not complete. So Jane, you are here. Operation West Creation is given the role of championing the parish development model. The means of local government are the ones going to coordinate and are going to do all those main activities. But for us, our role is very clear, is to champion, to make people appreciate that it's a good move, whereby you'll not say OWC is giving cows that are doing family planning. Now that will not be there. Or OWC is bringing the inputs that are not germinating. Or they're bringing inputs that are coming with the fall army worms, because it has an army name in it. So all this will not be there. Things are changing for the better, and for therefore, women should not be given that vote of Women Livelihood Fund. Women will get their fund more and beyond what they were getting at the means of gender. To conclude, I know I have little time, but I would wish to have given more than this. There are critical things that we needed to look at in order to get better results. One of them is that why people have continued to enjoy enjoy corruption, because out of the money they get out of corruption, they can buy themselves out or live comfortably. A few times maybe in prison, and they come and they will be guests of honors in all this function because they will be very loaded. How do we make them lose appetite? Because if they don't lose appetite, it will be very difficult to defeat this vice of corruption. The military, when it was given the challenge to face with the operation of cattle rustling, where there was a lot of raids, but somehow they were able to give the rustlers and the raiders to lose appetite because there was a lot of sanction and then some rewards to the people who were disciplined. So therefore, this particular parish development model, in line with a new reform, which is called the Apex platform, which Apex platform is a new reform where the president will be in the seat of this forum, and then we shall have the prime minister, we shall have the Minister of Finance, and the National Planning Authority. The effort in this Apex is to ensure that there's sanctions and rewards for those ones who will be doing well. So Operation Wealth Creation will be the one looking at who should be rewarded really in terms of engaging different stakeholders and even non-state actors will all attend different engagement Operation Wealth Creation will be having. And we are also going to ensure we come up with special reports to advise the Apex platform on policy change and also in coming up with the better strategies by having think tankers from different walks of our country in order to be able to give really good recommendation on how best we can deal with the challenges we are facing. So for the market being enough, there's no doubt about it. But the worry why the price goes down are fundamentally three. One is that some of these products are perishable. For instance, the pineapples, Jen, as you were saying, it drops to 1,000. From 3,800, 4,000, a big pineapple, it drops to 1,000 because it's perishable. But the solution to that is dryers, because there are countries in the world which wants dry fruits. You cannot exhaust the demands in the China market. The China market is huge and they want dry fruits. And yet, for us here, to put a dryer, which is the first primary processing, just adding value by drying it, and you have the market. This can be attained. The second consideration is that when we say farmers produce pineapples, we should also be able to have a contract with those farmers. And you can only have contract with the farmers when the farmers are organized. And the organization of farmers is parish development model. And we cannot be even able to have very good market when we do not know the amount of tonnage we are going to have. So parish development model is going to have all farmers registered and give the farmers areas that we know that in this particular parish, in this particular district, we are going to receive this amount of tonnage of this product. And the cabinet, the president and cabinet have come very clear and given us the 18 now production lines. What should be produced? Let people not produce what is not of volume to attract any primary processing or cottage processing facility, because you produce very little and that very little is not sustainable. So all this, the parish development model answers. So anybody that we see does not support parish development model by any aspect is an enemy of the people.
And that is a general talking. Eh?
There's been a voice, clear voice saying that the people do not have the capacity, the people are going to be easily corruptible? How do you give people money? This is what the corporate bodies say. We must corporate responsibility, you must take back something to the people. Is that not what they say? Corporate responsibility, what do? You give back to the people. Now we are trying to take money to the people. People say, no, it should not go. If they are corrupt, let them also test the corruption. They are the ones who have been giving this money. We collect it from them. We exploit them by buying it cheaply from them. Now when we say take the money to the people, they're not supposed to give accountability because it's supposed to be revolving. Let it revolve within them. Once they're okay, then the whole country is okay. We have tried for all these years without them, and we are saying poverty 68%. Now, why don't we change and also take the money there so that the money is with them throughout? Then the corruption aspect will die, because now they will be the one checking. If the MP wants to corrupt with them, they will throw him out. If it is anybody who has been taking advantage of them, now they know that you have always been exploiting us. You have been buying our maize very cheaply. Now you want to come and exploit us again? They will check them. So the opportunity God has given us, we should maximize it. Finally, what are the principles of the parish involvement model? Because if you understand the principles, it makes you appreciate it better. The first one is focus. It is very focused, and it is aimed at ensuring that all the aspect of farmers being so disparate because they can sell their land because they can't afford to take children to school or even simple, but now this will organize them that they can borrow within themselves and they will not be disparate. Two, they will get very organized in terms of primary society, secondary society, and ultimately climax as a cooperative society, either of traders, of farmers, of industrialists. Those ones will be doing primary and secondary society. I mean, first and primary and secondary processing. Number three, they will be getting very clear transparency and accountability, because it is within themselves. They account to themselves, and they will be able to deal within themselves of all the shortcomings. They can say, Angina, you cannot be in this finance committee because whenever you see money, you begin developing very fun ideas. Number four, collaboration. They will be collaborating to ensure that they pick their priorities. For instance, now we are talking about silos in different regions. The private sector have put up so many silos in every region of our country, but they're operating only at 30%. What is the problem? So if you're going to put more silos, when for them they've put silos and they're operating at 30%, that will be dead capital. Two, government has put some stores, some warehouses under Office of the Prime Minister, Northern Development Program. NADS has put up stores in collaboration with the World Food Program. They are empty. Some people have turned them into their houses. Some of them are even people rearing poultry in them. Those were warehouses. Why are they empty? We must ask the question before we think of putting other stores. Some of them were put without cleaners, without dryers, so they don't qualify to be stores. They're just houses. But just adding things like dryers, cleaners, and then pallets for proper storage, then you deal with aflatoxin and all this that makes our prices go down, or failing the product in its quality will be dealt with. So there's little to invest in that regard, and we shall have no problem. Then in market-driven, our people produce without knowing that there's a market for this or that, but now we have been given guidelines of the 18 products, and those 18 products will all get to become industries. For each region, at least you can pick 4 or 5 of the 18, and you will be supported under the program of agro-industrialization and also in industrial development program as a program. Number 5 is market orientation and market-driven demands. Number 6, inclusion. What do we mean by this? Ensuring that everybody is included so that the women do not pick on a finance inclusion pillar and they say they want to run away because they can still maintain their resources. This time, if PS and the Secretary to the Treasury accepts to follow that, then you will be the one to be put on the cross. You will have killed the whole strategy. Number 7, equity. We want to ensure that there's equity. Number 8, prioritization, to ensure that people don't just go playing with whatever they think because it has succeeded in Kasese, let's also do it in Kampala. No. We must prioritize and ensure that what we put in a particular area, it is the one which can work very well in that particular area. Number 9 is result orientation. So you can see that the 9 principles of parish development model clearly shows that it is well thought through, and the 7 pillars, it's the one which people did not appreciate, including our members of parliament, and they only debated the pillar number 3, which is financial inclusion, and it diverted most of the people thinking, and yet there are 7, bring about 1.9 trillion, but we are only debating the 4.4 billion, and they decided to take away their money and left only 200 billion to start with. Can we bring back the rest? Because in presidential inauguration speech, he said only Myoga will be left aside. So finance, if it's still the corruption which they mention is this, you allow any money to go away, this time they will tell us to come after you, we shall be justified. I beg to submit.
That is submission from a general. The one thing I know about generals is a foreign general who was addressing a parade and he decided to tell a joke. And it took him 10 minutes. Then he said, this man, can you translate for them? And this man said one sentence and everybody laughed. He said, how did you convert my long story into such a short message? And the man said, well, in the military we follow orders. I've told them a fund has said laugh. Now you can laugh. But the orders are very clear. And I think this is speaking to integrated economy. I was looking through the National Development Plan. By the end of 2018, we had 1.4 million consumers connected to electricity. This is the National Development Plan. Now, majority of these, 92%, were domestic consumers. The very people we said don't even consume it. So how do we make sure these households' incomes rise for the 92% of the people who are connected to the grid, so that also the tariff can begin to contribute towards financing the sector? These are policy issues, these are budget issues as we go forward. I'm going to pick 3 more submissions from the floor, and then I'll come back to my panelists to wind up because my clock is running down. Jeff, money is long-term, money is short-term, money is small, money is here, money is not there. Jeff has been in these financial issues of putting monies together. What do you see out there? And after Jeff, I'll go just for purposes of warning her. Miriam Musali, you have to tell us what should be the policy role in mobilizing small monies and giving assurance to the foreigners to help us do these spaces. Jeff, you have the floor.
All right, thank you very much. First off, let me say that I'm quite happy, actually, for the first time in a budget dialogue, because we are in the solutions end of it. We are no longer discussing the budget from the accountant's point of view, that this line item is going for this, and it is short, that one is going for that, and it's not enough. We're in the solutions part of it. That's very, very, very uplifting. And I would also like to thank the panel. I would also like to thank Mr. Yota and echo what he has said, We have money. We have money. But money from the private sector, where I come from, we only follow asset classes. So if you have not packaged your assets in a particular way, so that it is what we call investment grade, we will not come there. So in this space of solutions, we have reached that stage where you can find that the parish model, which we have just been elaborated with, the parish model, is actually talking about asset classes in the rural areas. Now, interrogating the budget is always about whether it is fit for purpose. Yeah? And this, for the first time to me, is what we are doing now. Now, what is this purpose? The purpose is NDP 3, Vision 2040, the Middle Income Economic Status Agenda. Now, is this budget framework and budget discussion, does it fit these purposes? Let me try and unpack a few very quickly. We have the CBR. Is the current CBR fit for NDP 3? Is it fit for Vision 2040? Is it fit for purpose for the Middle Income Economic Strategy? I think we have to accept that whereas it is not very fit, it is moving towards there. Because where it was actually anti-NDP 3, it was anti-Vision 2040. So we can actually progress from there. It is in a good place. We're in a good place as far as the key price in the economy, which is the CBR.
CBR is central bank rate in case you've run short of data in your television room or the signal has gone away, and Mr. Google can't answer that one. It is set by the central bank as a signal for the money markets.
Yeah, for the rest of the price we pay for borrowing is the base. So domestic borrowing, is it fit for purpose? It is not, but not because of the CBR, really. It is because the asset classes which domestic borrowing are supposed to finance are distorted. We have distortions in borrowing domestically. Why is it so? Because, and this is, I'm speaking to the solutions part of it. It is so because the P which we talk about in PPP, the first P, which is public, everybody thinks that P is consolidated fund money only. That should be government money only. That P, my friend from UDC will tell us, it is split into two. The first P, it is public as in government. Then there's a second P, as in pools of money from the private sector. When we pull our money together, it becomes public as private sector. So I would invite us, as part of the solutions and way forward, to focus on that P where we pull our money. Yeah? Mr. Ayota represents a very good example of pooling of money. But it is very small. People think NSSF is very big. It is very small. If you relate that to what the private sector, by this I mean individuals in the informal sector, what they can pull together. Exchange rate, inflation, and so on, are they fit for purpose? We are moving there. We are moving there. Now, there's been an elephant in the room about the 2020. 2020 was what in schools they call a dead year. Because government decided to save lives and to switch off the engine of the economy to save lives. But if we decide to take advantage and review what we have been doing before and chart a new path, The lady from SEATINI put it very well. A product-driven path. A product-driven path. When she was talking within the context of marketing. If we choose a product-driven path, I think we shall go somewhere. And I'm so happy that you brought it up, Madam. Because markets are not just there. Markets are there for products. And this is where the General has been talking about the parish model. The parish model is also about products. So we are actually in a good place. We are talking in the same language for a change. Now, I want to conclude by focusing on the key aspect of this. All this budget dialogue, NDP3, Vision 2040, there is one key aspect, that is human capital development. We must really position for that. We have ignored it for a long time, and whatever effort we make, if we don't look at this, in the private sector, we speak very plainly. Our education sector has collapsed. And that presents, some people who are fond of challenges will say that's a challenge. But for us, we say that's an opportunity to reboot. Reboot so that our education system now becomes compliant with NDP3, Vision 2040, and so on. Finally, I would like to invite us to forget this notion of subsistence agriculture. It is, for those of us who come from rural areas, and we know a little bit of finance, there's no such thing as subsistence agriculture. These villagers, even the one on 1 acre, grows for food and grows to sell some in the local market. The word subsistence was brought about by the colonialists. If you didn't grow cotton or coffee or tea, you're in subsistence. Yeah? Now, for the parish model, this is where it comes into perspective. These people who bring their food in our markets from their 1 acre or 2 acres, they are not in subsistence. They are bringing to sell, trying to get a price. Now, unfortunately, it's the market which is making that price for them, and that market is often distorted because of the arrangements, the lack of arrangements which the parish model is now trying to what? To fix. So it is very, very important that we treat the farmer correctly by valuing their output, their input in the economy through their output, which they have demonstrated during the dead year. During the dead year, the only people who were working were the farmers. We never starved. They sold their produce, and we are still eating from them. I would like to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. You know, I'm going back. Economic recovery program had a very important aspect of getting the prices right. This is basic economics that very many people do not get to know. Price relatives, getting the prices right. And that's why earlier on I read to you how the prices of Robusta coffee, Arabica coffee, cotton cake had been multiplied 183%, 273% to get the price right to the farmer and get them to benefit from their harvest, because that was going to recover the economy. Because at the end of the day, if they sell a pineapple at 1,000, they are not going to buy mineral water. Because the 1,000 will go to buy a malaria drug. Then the factory that sells mineral water will go under. And as it goes under, the traders who sell it in the arcades will go under. And as they go under, no consumption of electricity, no payment of rent. Did we have a banker in the house? We call it a non-performing asset. The banker that lent the arcade builder has lost his money. And then Uganda will not be attractive no matter how many flyovers you build around Clock Tower. Because people will pick that signal. There's no business in Uganda. So this conversation is about this budget and many other aspects of the budget. How do you finance an economy to grow? It is integrated. The moment you have COVID in one corner, there is COVID elsewhere. That has been the language of WHO. So any poor person anywhere is a threat to all of us. They are going to steal your cows. They are going to steal your goats. They are going to steal your lights. They are going to steal your fridge. You will not sleep in that house because the poor are awake. And as somebody said, there is going to be a time when the poor will have nothing to eat except the rich. I am hoping that is not about to happen. What do we do to sell? What do we do to help these people to sell? And the president was right. The farmer does not know the thing called aflatoxin. They don't. They don't intend to put aflatoxin in their maize. That was not the intention. But in the first place, we never recruited an extension staff. 5,000 parishes have no parish chief. Who is supposed to be the administrator of the extension staff? A lot of things are centralized at central government level. Yet the real managers of the economy are the local governments. They have no money. So at the end of the day, standards are neither here nor there, even when they are well developed. Livingstone, this is a standards issue. But you set the standard, they must be enforced. Now we have come from the parish model. They are telling us they are going to put things in place. What is the standard situation like? If I can't sell it to Kenyans, will I sell it to the Americans? Even if they open the Rwanda border and they say, sorry, the border is open now, but aflatoxin, no territory. We are building roads in Congo. To take aflatoxin? Certainly not. So what should we do with our standards? And we're going to get into this conversation and end up on the taxation issue. We need to finance development. We've talked about private sector financing. There must be government financing. And Sarah is going to be coming to talk to us. What is it that we're seeing in the taxation? David.
Thank you, moderator.
David was my former boss, I think.
And also now I'm still your former boss.
You see, once a boss, they never end, these guys.
Thank you, Dr. Mumuza, and our great panelists and comrades who have spoken before me. I always complain that we have a problem of quality culture in the country. And that even within us, the top policymakers, we still don't appreciate the role of quality standards in competitiveness of businesses, in competitiveness of enterprise, and in competitiveness of the country. Moderator, there is no wonder you have called me last as a standardizer, yet I would have been first, because quality must actually be put ahead of every productive activity, every value-adding activity, and that's what we need to appreciate.
You needed to hear the mess around.
I'm very happy that even the president yesterday, but one, acknowledged that the problem is no longer on quantities. And as we have acknowledged, from maize production, from various production, we have quantities. But the issue is, what is the quality of these quantities? The focus now has been that we produce more for the stomach, but soon we shall saturate production for the stomach, meaning that our local domestic market will be saturated with our production capacity, with our manufacturing products, with our various outputs. So the next one is, if we cannot eat all of it, what next? We must sell. And that means that we must make sure that these products can be able to access market beyond us. So as the Uganda National Bureau of Standards, we have already decided to go ahead by making sure that we provide all the necessary standards across the various sectors, the core sectors of our economy: agriculture, engineering, chemicals and cosmetics, management services. So we have mapped that in every productive activity or value addition in our country now, you are either doing production and agriculture, that is agro-processing, you are either doing this under engineering, that is steel, construction, and name it, You're either doing this under chemicals and so on, cosmetics, lotions, and all those beauty products, you know them, it's a big business, or you are offering management services, hotels, tourism, education, and so on. So we have provided all this stock of standards across these key sectors of the economy. So the issue is, how do we make sure that we increase uptake of these standards to focus on making sure that they enable us to access the market beyond. Of course, the president also emphasized that what is good for us must be good for those outside. And I think that was his key message. That why are we complaining that other people are rejecting our commodities, and yet it seems we are happy to consume them. So the Bureau is also responsible for protecting our own, despite focusing on giving market access. So we have harmonized these standards across the region. East African region now, when UNBS certify a Ugandan product, it should freely access the East African markets as harmonized standards. So that is one of the enablers for market access beyond the domestic market. But we have also gone ahead to start engaging at the African continental level. You are aware that effective January this year, we are already on the African Continental Free Trade Area. That's a huge market. And you are aware also that we have an African National Standards Body, which is called African Regional Standards Organization. We have already engaged this discussion with them to start harmonizing our standards across the African continent, so that, again, a Ugandan product should freely sell across Africa, so long as UNBS has certified it. So that is the enabler and the facilitation we are making as UNBS, and we are saying that, can we make sure that as consumers and as producers, we embrace the quality culture and stop looking at it as a UNBS thing, but your thing. Because quality standards are good for you, not for UNBS. For us, we come in to make sure that we protect the consumers, but for you, the producers of these products, you must actually take the first responsibility to put the correct market, the quality product on the market. So that, again, when these people build trust and confidence in your product, then you can be able to make more money. Most important, that you can sell within and without. In this market, we have provided you facilities in. So we have put a basic infrastructure to do that. We have international accredited laboratories to provide conformity assessment for exports to any country, depending on market requirements. So that one we have put. We are also making sure that we tighten the inspection of imported products into our country to support the Buy Uganda, Build Uganda, because there is also a drive for import substitution. Why should we continue spending money on what we can actually produce? And we have a good news on the COVID lockdown. When we could not import anything, there was demand for sanitizers. In March, when the lockdown came, we had one company called Suraya with only 3 products. As we talk now, we have 112 sanitizer companies certified by UNBS producing about over 140 brands. And the president told you, we are actually exporting now to our neighboring countries. So that's opportunity. And this was the role of standards in innovation, in import substitution. On maize, when Kenya rejected our maize in March, we only had 21 companies that had been certified to process maize products. Today, as a result, we have over 200 lined up, maize millers and producers ready to get certified, because they have seen that dealing in primary raw products is not tenable. You can only guarantee the quality of maize if you add value. You first of all extend the shelf life, but you are not in a hurry to take any price. Like we have had, that you see, if I cannot get 500 shillings per kilo, then I can take anything. With value addition, you can actually insure against that. And we have been telling these people that instead of you coming to UNBS to certify a truck as required by Kenya, 30 tons, why don't you certify your company, your factory, so that you're able to mill these products, add value, and get other products, the PSST was saying. So we are saying that we must go to value addition as a way to go. to make sure that we can be able to access market. Otherwise, a lot of work is being done by the Bureau. We are prepared to go parish model. We have had a number of meetings that when production goes to the parish, quality will follow production to the parish. And that's what we are prepared to do, so that we make sure that quality first before you start thinking of quantity. I submit, moderator.
Thank you very much. Those, I think, Patrick, good accountability of the monies to UNBS. I don't need to say what you'll say with your team about expanding those investments in that space. I like guava because I grew up eating guava fruits, but now I find guava juice in supermarkets. Unfortunately, it comes from Egypt. And I pay 4,000 shillings per half a liter, actually 300 mils. That's not exciting, but while I'm looking for that guava from Egypt, I'm bypassing Ugandan-made juice because I don't know the standard. I'm really worried whether I will take it and reach home still in one piece. So standardizing those things, but I think this is also speaking to the industrialization agenda. We're talking about agro-industrialization. It looks like we look for industry that can sit in the industrial park. There are all these cottage industries, small things that happen out there. A lot of juice is being processed in Kampala and sold. What support are we giving to those individuals to invest at their level? They are not looking for so much money. Possibly $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, whatever equipment they have. But because we don't trust their juice, we are not taking it. But those who are used to it, maybe they have enough bacteria to deal with whatever it is, are taking it. There is one man really that allows juices in Wandegea. He was a student at the university, making juice in his own room. He came out and set up in Wandegea. If you're driving Wandegea just above First Pharmacy, you'll see Dalhousie juice up there. He employs over 280 people, making juice locally. These people are looking for investments. We had investment clubs. Now we're here, they are mobilizing money and it is going into treasury bills. Yet somebody out there is looking for it to process the pineapples so that they can move from 1,000 to elsewhere. I want to ask Musali, Miriam, what happened? We were really driving these investment clubs. I think the policy was right. What happened? What can we do as government to revive these clubs, leave alone channeling the money eventually into wherever it should be going? And I want this money to go into those cottage industries. But first of all, what do we do to mobilize those small monies? Jeff talked about them. We've talked about NSSF. They receive small monies and aggregate them. What happened? I remember me and you being trained here about these things. The person who trained us, I can't trace him. Did he lose his network or his phone?
Thank you, Mr. Muhumuza. It's quite interesting for me because when we talk about mobilization of savings and when we look at capital markets and the products in the capital market space, we can't also run away from the fact that we need to have an agenda as government that focuses on growth of capital markets and the products in that space and reforming the pension sector. Those two discussions are discussions that government must have from a policy perspective. Why do I go in that direction? I go in that direction because to mobilize savings, someone must give. There must be an incentive if people are to save. Now, when you look at the capital market space, one of the things that we look at capital markets is how do you widen, for example, the investor base? You widen the investor base by making sure that we don't only have Patrick. We have Patrick and 5 mini Patricks. That's what we do. When I joined the capital markets in 2004, we were part of the reform agenda for pensions, 2004, with the same discussion on mobilizing savings. 2021, we have not concluded the pension reform process. That is very sad. That is a big loss. We have lost time and we have lost resources because the pension system must grow from the ground up. An investment club is just level 1. It doesn't even future when it comes to growth of savings. It is just level 1. But how do we mobilize savings? We do a total reform of the pension sector, a total reform from micro pensions, Even Rwanda now has micro-pensions. They have micro-pensions, we don't have it. Look at the unsustainable nature of our defined benefit public service scheme. We should not be having that conversation now. The reform should have taken place. 2005, I was at the Ministry of Public Service, and we were speaking about how do we make the public service scheme sustainable. We are still talking today. So we have to see that reform. Now what happens is when you reform the pension sector, pension funds need where to invest. So they go to the private equity space. That's where capital markets comes in. Where does government loop in? Government gives incentives. If an investor like NSSF is to invest in the public equity space, in the private equity space, do you know how much tax they will pay? It is over 60%. Why? Because the pension fund, the investor, is going to put money into a private equity fund. That fund is going to pay tax of 30%. When there are dividends, it's going to pay tax of 15%, isn't it? That is the fund. Remember, the private equity fund is going to invest in a company, the enterprise, which is also paying corporation tax of 30%, and is also paying tax on dividends. So how are we going to grow? We're going to grow by reforming pensions alongside capital markets, and the small things we are doing like investment clubs are only the precursor. They are just lighting a certain fire down there, and that fire can be lit and put into the economy, and we will see mobilization of savings. So it is a sad conversation that I'm having with you. It is an unfortunate conversation that we are still talking about reforming the pension sector.
I think the only sad part about it is we are still talking about it 20 years later. That's the only sad part about it. Because all we have been focusing on is taxation. Taxation. Here is money. How do you grow the tax base? Don't just widen and deepen it. First grow it. And she has given us the numbers. Just allow them to put money there, you tax. They invest, you tax. They produce, you tax. Sir, what is the tax figure looking like? Let's give them the microphone to Sarah, and then I'll come back to my panelists and we begin to wind up. I know there is a curfew. But most importantly, there is this President's address on COVID. We also want to be home, and the NTV needs time to run that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Muhumuza, Dr. Sorry, and the panelists. I was impressed by the General's presentation. He almost became an economist and an accountant. We are all in this together. Regarding taxes, I work with Ernst & Young. I'm an associate director in tax. Before that, I was with the tax authority. So I've worked both in the public and the private. But from the private sector perspective, we look at tax to GDP ratio still below the sub-Saharan average. And this still gives us so many unanswered questions. Even when the finance ministry is thinking of financing the budget, we have Mr. Ochaila there. Where does he get this money? We must pay tax to finance all this infrastructure, to finance energy. Energy is a very critical sector for the economy. So we note that really what is very important is last year became very complicated because of COVID. URA is not able to meet the target. We are seeing them not meeting the target this year. Where do we finance this budget? Indirect taxes still play below the target. We are looking at taxes like VAT. We are looking at excise duty. And specifically, even in this discussion, we talked about looking at the grassroots and how to support them. IT becomes a very critical area. As you support those village people, the parish model, We are looking at farmers who may not be very literate, but they may be able to get a smartphone and check the weather status. I come from the extreme district near the border, Bukwa. It has not rained there since April. The maize is all wilting because farmers planted, they didn't even know whether there will be rain. They need this technology with them. So as government talks about supporting with the Myoga and inputs, how are we handling things like metrology, technology to support? We are now putting the 12% excise duty on data. This data is needed by everyone now, even with this COVID. Is it possible that we would have avoided that and looked somewhere else? Government desperately needs this tax. If you look at indirect taxes, they are regressive in nature. I will buy this bottle of mineral water at 1,000, and the poor man will also buy it at 1,000. So you find that the incidence of tax becomes very high for somebody who is poor. How would we mobilize this? We must be able to work. Household incomes must improve so that people can buy goods and services. And in this way, we are able to collect indirect tax. URA is still struggling with the implementation of e-freeze, electronic fiscal receipting services. The aim was to make sure that there is no loss of revenue, especially by the manufacturers. The standards guy was talking to us about the sanitizer people. We want to count all those bottles and make sure there is some excise duty may be paid by manufacturers, by people making waters, juices. How do we pick that? Through e-freeze, because we were able to stamp each and every, URA brought the software. We have to make sure that we now go into the URA system and receipt each and every invoice. This is only going to affect multinationals and increasing their cost. Do you expect somebody in Chikuva in downtown to implement e-freeze? It is still a nightmare, I'm telling you. And what I can say is that the informal sector still remains untapped because it is still a nightmare for government and for all of us. We must all pay a fair share of our tax to support this economy. I submit.
Thank you, Sarah. You're talking about e-freeze. I heard the word electronic, and it reminded me of electricity. I don't know whether e-freeze can run without electricity. It's a data-driven thing. It's electricity moving around. I'm getting back to my panel to wind up this conversation. But we talked about taxes, and really taxes need to be very, very strategic. I've been following a sad story about tobacco. For some reason, the factory shifted to Kenya, but actually left somebody here to manage the growing of the tobacco by tobacco farmers. Some of the richest people when I was growing up were tobacco farmers. The Bunyoro region, Mitiana, Ntoro, and then West Nile. We grew tobacco, and that's how some people went to school. My parents couldn't grow tobacco because of their Christian values, so they grew coffee. There was always an alternative, something to do in those villages. But now we said we want to add value before we export anything. So we put a tax on anything that was going out unprocessed, including tobacco. The tax made us uncompetitive in the region. The Kenyan factory forgot about the Ugandan farmers and moved on to Burundi and Congo, and that's why the tobacco is being grown, transported on Ugandan roads into Kenya for processing, and then the tobacco comes back to be sold through a supermarket that is recently launched called Akamwesi. So where is the integration? Where is the logic? This man is suffering. The demand for electricity is hardly there, just because we are poor. We want policies that make us poor. I'm going to end with Patrick. Let me throw the dice to Celestino. You have had the conversation. What is your take? What is your last word for us?
Yeah, for my take is all the way from the president's speech, all the commentaries, NDP3. The job to be done is very clear. Electricity is at the center of everything. We know the new job to be done. It is reduce the cost, make it reliable, take it as far as possible. And listening in to Keith, again, we were looking at the statistics released about 2 weeks ago. Solar is taking up a lot of space. We see kerosene imports are reducing. We know as Ugandans, we are not community-based. We live far off each other, so the grid will not reach everybody. So looking at innovative solutions where we can use solar home systems or mini grids to accelerate access for households while focusing on electricity for industrial production remains very, very, very important. As I indicated, if you have to increase the installed capacity, it's now going towards 2,000 megawatts. Maximum demand, I was checking last month, was around 743, including exports. So really, and this is renewable energy, River Nile continues to flow. The job to be done is how do we get the wires and deliver this power to where it's required? And as I indicated, all that requires investments. Not today, it should have been done much, much earlier. So financing that requires money, which can be combined both private and government, but government, of course, taking a biggest chunk of this. And as indicated, it's not that you deliver power and it's needed immediately. No, you first put the infrastructure. The demand might be low. What we have seen is over a period, the load builds up, because when the power is there, then people start buying motors, improving their household equipment, and so on. So we deliberately build this infrastructure, then demand will follow along that corridor where we have put the infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, MD Umeme. I was reading again the figures while we were doing our planning, and I picked a document of power sector plan 2015. Now, in 2015, we planned to produce from hydro about 539. The demand was supposed to be 542. Now, in 2021, according to that document, the demand should have grown to 784. That was the government plan. But the production, 2,079. So they provided for a reserve of 1,767. What kind of planning is this? That you plan to have reserve power instead of planning to increase household incomes and people can consume it, and you're attracting this man to invest, and Keith is saying here, people look at where are the returns. And Uganda's power sector is planned to have a reserve of 1,767 megawatts in 2021. And we're going to blame COVID for this? Julius, you deal with budget issues from the civil society side. Surely, this is a budget conversation. You have some 3-4 minutes to wind up.
Thanks so much, and I think, Fred, you really touched on something I wanted to talk about. Very, very briefly, I think two things for me, just in terms of this roundup. One is, I think we talked about transport and electricity, but we left the issue of interest rates in this country. And as long as we don't see what we can do about it, I think the cost of doing business will still remain high. And I remember, Fred, when we talked about it, and I said, oh, interest rates are high, it's at 21, and you even said, no, that's premium. That's when you are very good, you are good at paying back your debt, but others really can even go higher. So that needs to be fixed, and I'm hoping to hear what my friend Ochaira will talk about it. The last thing I think you touched on it, I think for me is a fiscal discipline in this country. And I think fiscal discipline is not a monopoly of any agency. I think it's most of the agencies. If we don't improve on the way we manage projects and programs of government, we are not going to get returns. If you have the Northern Bypass, which is supposed to end in 5 years, now 20 years down the road, we haven't even finished it, we are going to have a problem. And I think even the private sector, one of the things that they have been looking out for was, I should budget for a pen, instead of supplying it to government at 1,000, I must make it 2,000, because government will take longer to pay me back. Those are kind of discipline we need to have within our system in terms of ensuring that we get efficiency in what we are doing. Lastly, on the same on fiscal discipline, of course, is our capacity also to absorb the resources that we have. I also know definitely that it is an area that we need to fix. We cannot keep on saying, let's get more money. We have not even talked about debt. But concerning the fact that even the money you have, you're not spending it, you are unable to do it simply because you have issues you should have addressed. Because by the time you say, I want this road, you should have already said, I no longer have any issues to deal with the right of way. I should have already done that. But you can't sign a contract and then along the way, you know, somebody has a shrine on the road and they say, however, even if you give me $1 billion, I won't take your compensation. They will say that to you if they don't hike the price at a level that you can't even pay. So for me, these are very critical that if we to achieve the transformation we are looking for, we definitely need to look at that. Thank you so much, Fred.
Thank you, Julius. The corruption begins, where did the president say? I'm yet to finalize the speech. I've had social media. Let's switch off our microphone, Julius. But we have had a commitment from the topmost technical people in the Ministry of Finance that he got his marching orders. He's going to make sure these things get out. At inception level, the time really, and I'm going back to our document, Economic Recovery Program, because this is a recovery time. We are blaming COVID, but I think 30 years we've been struggling to recover. That World Bank document of 1987 clearly said, what are the preconditions to convince the board to lend us $60 million? They said there is broad-based support for policy. I'm not sure we have that. Jeno here is talking about how the parish model, people are still struggling with it. And it's a parish that has always existed since before all of us were born. Discipline in the public service. This was 1987. These were concerns of the World Bank 35 years ago. Consensus on the policy agenda. Government implementation capacity. We are still talking the same. I mean, Miriam Musari just raised these same issues. They make us feel sad. What is making us feel sad is the time. Jane, are you sad like me? Don't be. Because what is making us sad, we found the solution at least. That we need to make progress. To decide to do things and do them. Not just to keep talking. You have the floor, Jane.
Thank you so much, Fred. And thank you so much to our the audience. Very, very good points which came out. Jeno, I do support the parish model 100%, because you said if you don't support, you are an enemy of the people. And if a Jeno says you are an enemy, what happens? That's a disclaimer. So I support. I want to go to the issue of the parish model, Jeno, that we need, and I repeat, to make the market right. And from your submission, with all due respect, you haven't yet captured that. Because you have said you can't exhaust the China market. You can't exhaust the China market. Then two, you said that you are going to do contracts with the people, the producers. Where will you take those products after making the contracts? And when you talk about China, you can't exhaust the China market. That's true. The China market is so big. Which segment, which market, specific market do you want to capture? Let me give you an example of Kenya. Kenya negotiated with China to export avocados. And the issue was, with China, like Uganda, we are running a very high trade deficit with China. Kenya said, by the way, can't we send some products to you so that we reduce the trade deficit? China had a very high tariff. They have tariffs on avocado, but they were able to reduce on the tariff. And China said, you know what, these are the kind of avocados you want, hard cover. Can you supply it? Kenya said, yes, we can. I want it frozen. Kenya said, yes, we can. So what I'm driving at, Jeno, before you make those contracts, get the market. Specific market. Don't talk about you can't exhaust the China market. No. Get the market. Agree. Because today, today the trend, you know, we have been talking about the continental free trade area. Like my brother was saying, we started trading in January, but we are continuing the negotiations, different stages. But that is not a market. We need to go specifically to a product market, like what Kenya did with China, you know? So it's a product, specific quantity, specific quality, and a product. Kenya today is exporting to China avocados, but even small-scale producers who have about 20 trees, avocado trees, they take to the private sector because the standard is the right one. That private sector who is mobilizing that tells them, this is what I want. This is how you look after it. But it's government which negotiated the China market, you know? So these are the roles. So we need the issue of the market. The product is clear. I didn't see it here. So for me, okay. So then that's good, Geno. But from the, and also because what I heard from my brother there, that what if we can't eat everything? Who is going to buy? You know, that it's like what we produce to eat, the leftovers we sell. That isn't right. Because the needs of our market might be different. And I can give you an example of pineapples. The Luo people produced pineapples. They told them, there is a market, it can't be finished. They produce pineapples. This private sector man came with a box, big box with squares. Said, bring your pineapples. Is it okay? Put it there. The pineapples were so big because we want the bigger the better, but outside it's different. So the issue of market, then you work backwards to look at the standard, to look at the storage and all that. Second, Fred, please.
The last one. Yeah.
The last one.
I don't want people to miss DST's response.
Okay. It's the issue of financing our development. Is very critical. And I think we need to rethink very seriously the financial sector. Somebody talked about the CBR. But we remember there is a time when Bank of Uganda put in place a CBR and it was ignored by the commercial banks. Okay? So the issue of the financial sector.
There is a banker in the house who ignores it. He will give us his reasons during the cocktail.
No? It's the issue of government control over the financial sector. And this is a sector which leads to outflow of resources. We are talking about illicit financial flows, but we're also talking about capital flight. We are talking what you are saying, Fred, mobilizing small monies. We need to reorganize our banking sector. We won't go into that. But for me, what I have liked about this debate is that we are talking about rethinking our policies. You know, let us rethink. Let us not be bound by jargon, private sector led. When there is no private sector, when the private sector will have a middleman getting maize there, selling here and all that, you know. So let us continue that rethink. For me, I'm very happy with this debate and it should continue. Thank you very much.
Very good when you talk about rethinking. 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with a senior person in the ruling party, and I believe this is the message they will take back about the goat market in Saudi Arabia. Remember, we said for who, and then what, and then how. These fellows want white goats. If it is white, they are paying 300,000 to the farmer. I don't know what it charges the other side. And if it is white with tender meat, 500,000. And NSSF has on their website somebody who sold 300 goats and got 120 million. I saw that clip going on social media. So it's possible, but all we need to know is for who, what, how do I produce a white goat with tender meat? That pineapple. Patrick, you've been listening, you are the policy person, you are the budget person. Just give us your 2 takeaways. I know it has been a good conversation, and there are definitely some things you're going to think.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you very much, the wealth of experience and the discussions on this very important topic. I think I summarize in 3 points. Point number 1, I'm happy the thinking direction is in unison. We all agree that the choices of what we ought to do grow the economy are all in sync. The strategy to do it may vary, but where there is a debate and a positive debate in order to improve that direction is a very good positive thing. And this forum has availed us with that opportunity. My second comment is with respect to savings mobilization. That table, I think they sat together because I think the birds of the same feathers flock together. The points raised by my friend the lady and Patrick Ayota, Miriam and Patrick, are very, very valid. And the frustration Miriam had about the failure of the pension reform for 20 years is a result of, among others, there are so many factors. Among others, maybe our strategic mismatch of the packaging of the messages in order to evolve the message right from we, the practitioners, we, the policymakers, and the lawmakers. The only thing which went to the lawmakers that made the Minister of Finance withdraw the pension bill 1 year ago was that because of the fact that UBRA, Uganda Retirement Benefits Regulatory Authority, is under finance, and NSSF, they thought the pension sector is NSSF. Well, that was the thinking of our bosses at that time. Those, I hope I'm not misrepresenting their view, but I think generally that was what it is.
If you had it, it is likely to have been that.
If you are pushing ahead with the reform, you rather reform NSSF law and you are done with the pension sector reform. Totally wrong. So I think the strategic direction we must take from this conversation is to repackage the message. Fortunately, there is new parliament now. 11th parliament is on, and we're waiting for the ministers. Let's put together our ministers, first to ground them on the policy pillars on which to drive the pension sector reform in order to mobilize the critically required savings right from the lower levels into a very big chunk of money so that we may not have to rely heavily on even those people who are coming from all over the world in order to invest here. We should be driving the investment agenda right from here in a strong way, coherent and consistent with the development of capital markets. Yes, interest rates are now negative in Europe, but why is nobody coming here? Someone asked that question. But I think we shall finish it at the short cocktail because there is curfew. The money which is priced at minus, we have borrowed some for budget support because of shortfalls of revenue, because of COVID, catastrophe of COVID. They package it through the ECS, the financial institutions. There's a financing model. They get an arranger. Before you know it, they're almost towards very commercial levels. Why? Because of the inbuilt interests in them at every level and each player, of course, certainly making some money. So while the interest rates are negative there, you cannot tell somebody out there that since interest rates are negative there and they are positive here, come quickly run. You make money, we grow the economy, and you benefit. It goes through the ECA system of financing, either in Europe or in the US or wherever they are. So we cannot entirely reap from the benefit of those interest rates. However, we managed to negotiate, I think arranged by some of the bankers within this room, fixing of the interest rate. Earlier on in the agreement, we had negotiated floating. But when we saw those negative interest rates, we managed to renegotiate, and we also benefited a bit from that negative interest rate by saying, no, let's fix it at this lower level, because as the world opens, if COVID goes away, these things will go up. And if we are leaving it at floating, then we shall have a bigger debt burden. So at least we also thought, well, there are some technical people in that ministry also. We negotiated and fixed it there. So that is the second point, that we need to re-strategize, redefine the agenda, and galvanize the technical inputs to move everybody together, right from we, the technical people, our technical ministers, I mean the political leadership, we have ministers, and then go to Parliament. Because this thing was killed in Parliament. And my minister had no option but to withdraw. And was left with NSSF law, which was passed about 2 days before expiry of the past Parliament. I do not know whether there is acceptance for assent the way it is. But I think that's a debate for another day. Last, the issue about, which was raised by Ernst & Young, the tax system. Yes, until we reform the structure of the economy from largely this, Onego Bell said it was imperialists who said subsistence, but I think it's still relevant because subsistence is derived from the word subsisting. You are only subsisting. So to the extent that you are still subsisting, no matter what you call it, that's what it is. So the structure of the economy is that while there's a lot of production by everybody else, the larger part of that economy is not in money economy, about 70% or 78% out of the money economy. That's what we must enter with this parish model, organize people very well, cover all aspects of marketing, aspects of production, aspects of industrialization, and in doing so, be able to create jobs along the way. And those jobs are sustainable. They're not jobs which you just do overnight and then all of a sudden you... It's not like a border economy. Because, by the way, border is 99% import promotion. Because a border, you don't manufacture it here, you import it. That's the cost. I think I want to task URA in our next discussion to do border economics and find out whether we are not actually disinvesting by having very many borders. Number two, they use fuel, which is imported. That's foreign exchange going out. Number three, spare parts are going out. The only thing you have in a border is a Ugandan who is riding it, and the Ugandan is being carried in it, which is about less than 1%. Then you go to environmental pollution. I don't know what cost that one is. And then the nuisance of congestion and the time being wasted. So I need somebody to do some economics around it, and then that'll be a debate over another time. So to organize that informal sector, I agree, must be organized, even in its current form, to really make it possible for the informal sector to, in an organized manner, contribute positively to the growth of the economy in a sustainable manner, in terms of creating employment, adding to industrialization, and also, most importantly, linking to areas where we have comparative advantage. Because economies which have grown have seized the opportunity of a comparative advantage in the basic economics to manufacture, add value, employ, and grow the economy. Short of that, you'll just be having temporary benefits. But with this value addition along areas of comparative advantage, I think we have a very sound economy to look forward to. And broadly, finally, it's a message of good hope. I think despite all these challenges, we shall still emerge very robust in growth. It may not be in the levels that we want, but I think it's a very positive level of activity that we're going to have in this economy. I thank you, and I wish everybody well. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much, everybody who has been part of this in the comfort of your home. You can look at our screen. Those are the people who made it happen: NTV, Umeme, CS Bag, and SEATINI. Myself, I'm just going to check out my shirt, which I need to iron for two big events that are coming: the budget speech on the 10th, the cabinet on a day yet to be set. We want to appreciate your company with us. We hope you have learned something out of this conversation. Don't be shocked or surprised by the budget. We have put it into perspective, how it touches your history, your present, and your future. We are praying your future will be bright. Please do the SOPs so that we walk into that future together and see the brightness of this country as we walk towards Vision 2040. Thank you, everybody. God bless you.